Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a world where winter does not politely wait outside your door, but seeps through stone curls along the floor and settles into your bones before you even realize it. You push open a heavy wooden door and the first thing you notice is not what you see, but what you feel. The cold is immediate, patient, and completely uninterested in your comfort. The walls are thick, the ceiling low, and the light faint. Somewhere inside this dim space, a small fire flickers almost shy, as if it knows it has a great responsibility tonight. You take a slow step forward, and there is that moment of quiet realization. This is not just a house. This is a shelter in a season that does not forgive mistakes. And you probably would not survive this without a bit of help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. It is always nice to know who is drifting off to sleep across the world. Now, dim the lights and let your eyes adjust to the soft glow of the hearth as you move deeper inside. The fire is small, almost fragile, but it is everything. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in medieval households, the hearth was the central source of heat and life. Without it, the stone structure around you would feel less like a home and more like a cold container. You notice how the family has arranged themselves around it, not formally, not in any organized way, but instinctively. Every body leans toward the warmth, every movement curves inward. You find a place to sit close enough that your hands begin to feel something other than numb. The heat is uneven. One side of your face warms while the other remains chilled, reminding you that this is not comfort as you know it. It is negotiation. The fire gives what it can and you accept it without complaint. There is a faint smell of smoke hanging in the air, mixed with something earthy, perhaps damp wood or wool. The scent clings to everything. Your clothes, your hair, even your thoughts seem to absorb it. You notice how the smoke does not fully escape. It curls upward, hesitates, then spreads along the ceiling before slowly drifting toward an opening, somewhere above. A curious little detail that often surprises people is that many medieval homes lacked proper chimneys for a long time. Instead, smoke simply found its way out through holes in the roof or small vents. You can feel that reality now as your eyes sting slightly and you blink more often than usual. It is not unbearable, just persistent, like a quiet reminder that warmth comes with a price. Across the room, someone shifts a log with a simple iron tool. The movement is careful, almost practiced. Firewood is not wasted here. Every piece matters. The flames respond gently, rising just enough to brighten the space for a moment before settling again into a steady glow. You listen to the sounds around you. The soft crackle of burning wood. The faint rustle of fabric as someone adjusts their cloak. A low murmur of voices, not quite conversation, more like a shared presence. It is peaceful in a way that feels earned rather than given. Historians still argue whether medieval families perceived this constant closeness to the hearth as comforting or simply necessary. As you sit here, it feels like both. There is no illusion of luxury, yet there is something deeply human about gathering around a single source of warmth, sharing it without needing to speak about it. You extend your hands toward the fire again, watching how the light dances across your skin. Shadows move along the stone walls, stretching and shrinking with each flicker. The room feels alive in its own quiet way, shaped as much by light and shadow as by the people within it. A child shifts closer to the fire, pulling a rough wool covering tighter around their shoulders. You notice how even indoors, no one is truly without layers. The cold is always present, just held at bay rather than defeated. It waits patiently in the corners along the floor near the door where a faint draft slips through. You follow that draft with your senses. It brushes against your ankles, subtle but undeniable. The stone beneath your feet holds the chill of the earth itself. No matter how long the fire burns, some part of the room will always remain cold. There is a quiet understanding here. Warmth is not something that fills the space. It gathers in pockets, near the fire, beneath blankets, between people sitting close together. You begin to realize that staying warm is not about changing the entire environment, but about finding and holding on to these small areas of comfort. Someone places another piece of wood onto the fire, and for a moment the flames rise higher, casting brighter light across the room. Faces become clearer. Lines of fatigue, small expressions of calm, all briefly illuminated before the glow softens again. You notice how no one moves too quickly. Movements are measured, deliberate. Perhaps it is the cold that slows everything down, or perhaps it is the understanding that energy must be conserved. Even simple actions carry weight here. There is another small, almost unexpected detail. Some medieval households kept a small amount of embers alive at all times, even overnight, rather than letting the fire die completely. Relighting a fire from scratch in winter was difficult and time-consuming. As you watch the careful tending of the flames, you sense how important continuity is. The fire is not just for this moment. It is for the next hour, the next morning, the next cold stretch of night. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle into you. It is not overwhelming, but it is enough. Enough to soften the edges of the cold, enough to make stillness feel possible. And as you sit there listening to the quiet rhythm of fire and breath, you begin to understand something simple and profound. In this world, warmth is not taken for granted. It is built, maintained, and shared. Every flicker of flame represents effort, preparation, and care. The room grows a little quieter now. The fire steadies. The shadows calm. You feel your body adjusting slowly, letting go of the initial shock of the cold. And without quite realizing it, you find yourself settling into the same quiet pattern as those around you, drawn gently toward the hearth, where warmth, however modest, becomes the center of everything. The warmth from the hearth lingers faintly in your bones as your attention drifts away from the flickering fire and towards something less immediate yet just as vital. You begin to understand that this quiet moment beside the flames is only possible because of decisions made long before winter ever arrived. The fire in front of you is not just burning wood, it is burning preparation effort and foresight gathered across warmer months. Your thoughts follow the rhythm of the seasons backward. You imagine the same family moving through late summer and early autumn, when the air is still gentle but carries the first subtle warnings of change. The fields would have been alive with work not only for food, but for fuel. Because without enough wood, everything you are feeling now would vanish quickly, leaving only cold zone and long nights. A commonly accepted historical fact is that medieval households depended heavily on firewood as their primary source of heat and gathering. Enough of it before winter was not optional. It was essential. You picture hands gripping axes, the steady thud of wood being cut, the smell of fresh sap rising as branches fall. The labour is repetitive, almost rhythmic, yet there is urgency beneath it. Every log represents a future moment of warmth. Every missed opportunity could mean discomfort or worse. You imagine yourself walking alongside them, boots pressing into damp earth, the forest stretching quietly around you. There is a kind of calm here, but also focus. People do not wander aimlessly. They select trees carefully, mindful of what burns best and what will last. Some wood burns quickly and brightly, giving immediate heat. Other types burn slower, producing steady warmth that carries through the night. Even in something as simple as firewood, there is knowledge built from experience. A small but fascinating detail often mentioned in historical accounts is that certain communities preferred hard woods like oak or beech for long-lasting fires, while softer woods were used for kindling to start the flame. As you think about this, you realize how layered the process is. It is not just about gathering wood, it is about understanding it, choosing it, preparing it. You can almost hear the sounds, the sharp crack of splitting logs, the scrape of bark, the quiet conversation that passes between workers, not always about the task itself, but about the coming winter. There is a shared awareness that the cold season will test everyone in different ways. Historians still debate whether medieval families consistently had enough access to nearby woodland, or if fuel shortages were more common than we often assume. As you consider this, the effort of gathering wood feels even more significant. Perhaps some families worked harder because they had less. Perhaps others rationed carefully, knowing their supply would not stretch as far as they hoped. You shift slightly where you sit, pulling yourself a little closer to the memory of that preparation. The warmth you feel now begins to carry a different meaning. It is no longer just comfort. It is the result of many days of labour that you did not witness until now. In your mind, the scene changes again. The wood that was once part of a living tree is now stacked, carried, sorted. People move back and forth between forest and home, arms, filled shoulders, burdened breaths, steady in the cooling air. There is a quiet determination in these actions. No one announces the importance of the work. It is simply understood. You notice how the work does not belong to just one person. It is shared. Children might gather smaller branches, learning early what is needed to survive the colder months. Adults take on heavier loads, managing the larger tasks. Even those who cannot carry much may help in other ways, organising, stacking, preparing. There is also a sense of timing. The window for preparation is limited. Wait too long and the ground may harden, snow may fall, access to wood may become difficult. Start too early and the wood may not be properly seasoned, leading to inefficient fires that smoke more than they warm. You feel a subtle appreciation growing for something that in your own world might seem simple. Turning on heat, adjusting a thermostat. Here warmth is not immediate, it is earned over time through effort that spans seasons. Back in the present, the fire beside you gives a soft crack, pulling you gently out of your thoughts. A small spark rises, then disappears into the dimness above. Someone nearby adjusts a piece of wood again, ensuring it catches properly. Even now, even after all that preparation, attention is still required. The fire is never entirely self-sustaining. You glance towards the doorway where a faint line of colder air continues to slip in. It reminds you that the outside world is still there, still pressing against the fragile boundary of this home. The warmth inside is not absolute. It is a temporary victory maintained moment by moment. Another interesting, slightly unusual tidbit is that in some regions people gathered not only wood but also alternative fuels such as dried animal dung or peat, depending on what was available. It may not sound appealing, but in a harsh winter anything that could burn became valuable. As you think about this, you realise how adaptable people had to be, using whatever resources their environment offered. You shift your hands closer to the fire again, feeling that familiar uneven warmth. It feels a little more meaningful. Now, not just heat but history, not just comfort but effort transformed into something tangible. The room remains quiet, the same gentle rhythm continuing. You notice how no one speaks loudly about the work that made this moment possible. It is not something to boast about. It is simply part of life, as natural as breathing, as necessary as sleep. And as your thoughts settle, you begin to understand that every small flame in this room carries with it echoes of forests of labour, of preparation stretching across time. The fire is not just here. It is a continuation of everything that came before it. You relax slightly, letting that idea drift through you as steady and quiet as the glow of the hearth. The warmth feels just a little deeper now, not because the fire has grown, but because you have begun to see it differently. The fire continues its quiet work beside you, steady and patient, but your attention begins to drift again, following the unseen path that brought each piece of wood into this room. Gathering fuel was only the beginning. What mattered just as much was what happened afterward in the quiet spaces between effort and use. You picture the wood now, not in the forest, but stacked carefully near the home. There is a certain order to it. Logs are not thrown into a careless pile. They are arranged with intention, lifted slightly off the ground, angled to allow air to move between them. It seems simple at first glance, but as you look closer, you begin to understand how much thought rests in that quiet structure. A broadly accepted historical reality tells us that properly drying firewood, often called seasoning, was essential for efficient burning. Freshly cut wood contains moisture, and if burned too soon, it produces more smoke than heat. As you sit here feeling the gentle warmth from the hearth, you realise that this comfort depends not only on effort, but on patience. You imagine the woodpile in late autumn. The air is cooler now and the smell of damp earth lingers. Someone places another log onto the stack, aligning it just so. There is a rhythm to the work, almost meditative. Each piece must have space to breathe, to dry slowly over time. It is not rushed, because rushing would make the fire weaker when it is most needed. You notice something else. The woodpile is not left exposed without thought. In many cases, people use simple coverings, perhaps thatch rough boards or even layers of brush to shield the wood from rain and snow. It does not need to be completely sealed, just protected enough to prevent excess moisture from soaking in again. A curious little detail that often surprises people is that storing wood directly against a stone wall could sometimes cause it to retain dampness, so it was often kept slightly apart, allowing air to circulate. As you consider this, the arrangement of the woodpile becomes more than just storage. It becomes a quiet system refined through experience. Historians still argue whether most medieval households consistently had enough space to store properly seasoned wood, especially in more crowded villages. As you imagine tighter living conditions, you can see how this process might become more difficult. Perhaps some families had to burn wood before it was fully dry, accepting more smoke in exchange for immediate heat. You shift your position slightly, feeling the warmth from the fire shift with you. It is subtle but noticeable. Just like the woodpile, everything here depends on small adjustments. Nothing is perfect. Everything is managed. Back in the room, you glance toward a corner where a few logs are stacked for immediate use. They're closer to the hearth now, likely brought in earlier, to warm slightly and dry further before being placed into the fire. Even this small step makes a difference. A log that is too cold or damp will resist the flame, slowing the process, wasting precious energy. You reach out and imagine touching one of those logs. It would feel cool but not wet, solid but not heavy with moisture. There is a certain readiness to it, as if it has been waiting patiently for its moment to burn. Another interesting and slightly unexpected detail is that some households would store smaller pieces of wood indoors specifically to ensure they stayed dry, while larger logs remained outside until needed. This balance between space and necessity reveals just how carefully people had to think about every resource. The room feels steady again, the fire giving off a low, consistent crackle. You notice how the flames behave differently with each piece of wood. Some catch, quickly flaring for a moment before settling. Others take longer, glowing, slowly releasing heat in a more gradual way. It is almost like watching different personalities reveal themselves in the fire. You begin to sense that warmth here is not just about quantity, but about quality. A well-prepared piece of wood burns cleaner, brighter, more efficiently. It produces less smoke, more heat, and lasts longer. It is a small difference in preparation that leads to a large difference in comfort. There is a faint draft again near your feet, reminding you that the cold is still present, always waiting. The fire pushes against it, but never completely wins. It is a constant balance, like the careful stacking of wood outside or the measured placing of logs within the hearth. You listen closely and the sounds of the room seem to settle into a quiet pattern. The occasional shift of wood, the soft murmur of someone nearby, the faint whisper of air moving through unseen cracks. Everything feels connected, part of a larger rhythm that you are slowly beginning to understand. You think back to the woodpile again, standing quietly outside, holding within it the promise of future warmth. It is easy to overlook something so ordinary, but here it is as important as the fire itself. Without that careful storage, the hearth would struggle. The room would grow colder and the long nights would feel even longer. There is something calming about this realization. The idea that comfort, even in such a harsh environment, can be built step by step through attention and care. It is not about perfection. It is about doing enough consistently to keep the cold at a distance. You lean a little closer to the fire once more, letting the warmth settle across your hands. The glow reflects softly on the stone walls, steady and reassuring. You can almost imagine the wood outside resting in its ordered stacks, waiting its turn, each piece carrying a small part of the season within it. And as you sit there, quietly absorbing the gentle heat, you begin to appreciate how much of this moment depends on what is not immediately visible. The unseen work, the stored resources, the patience that stretches across weeks and months, all coming together in the simple flickering light before you. The fire continues to burn and you continue to feel its quiet gift, knowing now that every bit of warmth around you has been carefully prepared long before you arrived. The steady warmth from the hearth holds your attention for a while longer, but gradually you begin to notice something else. It is not just the fire itself that matters. It is where the fire sits and how everything around it seems to orbit its quiet glow. The hearth is not placed randomly. It is the heart of the home in the most literal sense. You shift slightly, letting your gaze wander across the room. Every object, every person, every small movement seems drawn towards this single point of warmth. There is no clear boundary, no marked circle on the floor, yet everyone instinctively knows how close to sit, how far to lean in, how to share the limited heat, without needing to speak about it. A well-established observation from historical research reveals that the hearth was the central feature of most medieval homes, often serving multiple roles at once. It was a place for cooking, heating light, and social gathering. As you sit here, you feel how naturally those roles blend together. The idea of separating them would seem almost strange. A pot hangs just above the flame, suspended carefully so that it does not touch the fire directly. You can hear a faint bubbling sound, soft and steady. The smell that rises is warm and simple, something earthy and nourishing. It adds another layer to the atmosphere, blending with the scent of smoke and wool. You notice how people position themselves, not just for warmth, but for purpose. Someone closer to the fire tends the pot, occasionally adjusting its position. Another person sits slightly back, hands busy with some quiet task, perhaps mending fabric or shaping a small tool. No one seems idle, yet no one appears rushed either. There is a gentle rhythm here, one that feels shaped by necessity rather than schedule. The fire dictates the pace. It cannot be hurried, only maintained. A small but intriguing detail often mentioned in accounts of daily life is that in many homes, the hearth also served as a kind of social anchor where stories were told and news was shared. As you listen closely, you can hear the low murmur of voices again. It is not a formal conversation, just fragments of speech drifting in and out, carried by the warmth. You find yourself leaning slightly closer, not just for the heat, but for that sense of quiet connection. The fire does more than warm bodies. It gathers people together, creating a shared space where presence matters more than words. There is also an unspoken understanding of responsibility. Someone must always be aware of the fire. You notice how no one lets it burn too low or flare too high. A log is added at the right moment. Embers are shifted with care. These actions are small, but they carry weight. A neglected fire could mean a colder night, or worse, a danger if it grows uncontrolled. Researchers continue to discuss whether medieval families organised their daily routines primarily around the hearth, or if it simply became the natural centre due to practical needs. As you observe this quiet scene, it feels less like a deliberate choice and more like something that happens inevitably. When warmth is scarce, everything moves toward it. You stretch your hands toward the flames, again noticing how the heat reaches you in uneven waves. It is stronger when you lean forward, weaker when you pull back. This constant adjustment becomes almost unconscious, your body learning the language of the fire without needing instruction. A faint crack sounds as a piece of wood settles, sending a brief shower of tiny sparks upward. They fade quickly, disappearing into the dim air above. You follow them with your eyes for a moment, then let your gaze fall back to the glowing embers below. Another interesting detail is that in some homes, especially simpler ones, the hearth might not even be raised or enclosed, as we might expect today. It could be a simple open fire on the floor, carefully managed, but still very much part of the room itself. This closeness makes the fire feel less like a separate object and more like a living presence within the space. You notice how the light from the flames shapes everything. Faces appear, softer edges less defined. The stone walls seem to breathe with shifting shadows. Even the smallest movement creates a change in the pattern of light and dark. There is a comfort in this, a gentle unpredictability that keeps the room from feeling static. The fire is never exactly the same from one moment to the next. It flickers, it settles, it brightens, it dims. And with each change, the atmosphere shifts just slightly. You listen again to the sounds, the bubbling pot, the quiet crackle, the occasional rustle of fabric. It all blends into a kind of soft background rhythm, steady enough to calm your thoughts, varied enough to keep you present. You begin to realize that this space is not just about surviving the cold, it is about creating a sense of life within it. The hearth provides more than heat. It offers light food and a place where time seems to slow down. A subtle, lesser-known detail suggests that some households even use the hearth as a place to dry clothing, or warm mum tools to warm it, indeed taking advantage of every bit of heat it produced. As you glance around, you can almost imagine damp garments hanging nearby, slowly releasing their chill. You shift again, settling more comfortably into your spot. The warmth feels a little more familiar now, less like something you must chase and more like something you can share in. And as you sit there watching the gentle dance of flame and shadow, you begin to understand why everything gathers here. In a world where cold presses constantly from the outside, the hearth becomes more than a feature of the home. It becomes the quiet centre of existence itself. The warmth holds steady for now, but your attention begins to shift towards something less comforting, something that has been present all along but easy to ignore at first. The air itself. You take a slow breath and there it is again, that faint sting at the back of your throat, the dryness, the subtle weight that settles in your chest. You blink once, then again, noticing how your eyes feel slightly irritated. It is not overwhelming, just persistent like a quiet companion you cannot quite shake. The fire that gives you warmth also fills the space with smoke, and here in this enclosed stone room there is no perfect way to separate the two. A commonly recognized historical reality is that many medieval homes struggled with indoor smoke because early hearths were often poorly ventilated. Chimneys as we think of them today were not always present, especially in simpler dwellings. As you sit here, you can see exactly what that means. The smoke rises, but it does not disappear. It gathers, spreads, and lingers. You tilt your head slightly upward, watching the faint grey haze drifting along the ceiling. It moves slowly, curling in gentle patterns, almost beautiful if not for the discomfort it brings. Eventually, some of it finds its way out through a small opening above, but not before leaving its mark on everything inside. There is a distinct smell now, stronger than before. Not unpleasant exactly, but heavy. A mixture of burning wood, damp fibres, and something older. Something that has settled into the walls over time. You realize that this scent is not temporary. It is part of the home itself. An intriguing little detail found in various records is that over time, soot would build up on the interior surfaces of houses, darkening beams and walls. You glance around and notice how the upper parts of the room are indeed darker, coated in a thin layer that speaks of countless fires before this one. Each winter leaves its trace. You shift slightly, adjusting your position as a thin ribbon of smoke drifts closer to where you sit. It makes your eyes water just enough to remind you that comfort here is always a balance. Too close to the fire and the smoke becomes more intense. Too far and the cold begins to creep back in. There is no perfect spot, only better ones. Scholars continue to examine how people adapted to these smoky conditions, and whether long-term exposure affected health more severely than we fully understand today. As you sit here breathing slowly, you can imagine how living with this day after day would shape both body and habit. You notice how the others in the room seem less affected, or perhaps simply more accustomed. They blink, occasionally shift their position slightly, but there is no sign of distress. This is normal for them. The smoke is not an interruption. It is part of the environment, as constant as the cold outside. Someone near the hearth leans forward and adjusts a piece of wood, causing the flames to flicker more brightly for a moment. The smoke thickens briefly, then thins again as the fire settles. These small fluctuations change the air in subtle ways, creating a rhythm you're only just beginning to notice. You take another breath, slower this time, as if your body is learning how to adapt. The irritation fades slightly, or perhaps you simply become less aware of it. There is a quiet resilience in this adjustment, a willingness to accept discomfort in exchange for warmth. Another lesser-known detail suggests that in some homes people would position themselves strategically based on airflow, choosing spots where smoke was less concentrated. You begin to understand how important that awareness would be. Even a small difference in placement could make a noticeable change in comfort. You glance again toward the opening above, where a faint stream of smoke escapes into the dark beyond. It is not a strong draft, just enough to carry some of the smoke away. You can almost feel the slow exchange between inside and outside, warm air, rising cold air slipping in to replace it. This constant movement of air is subtle but significant. It prevents the room from becoming completely overwhelmed, yet it also means that heat is never fully contained. The same path that allows smoke to leave also invites the cold to return. You shift your feet slightly, noticing once more the chill along the floor. It is a reminder that the warmth you feel is always partial, always limited. The fire pushes back against the cold, but it cannot seal the space entirely. There is a quiet acceptance in this. No one here seems to expect perfection. The goal is not to eliminate discomfort, but to manage it, to find a balance that allows life to continue. You listen again to the sounds around you, the crackle of wood, the soft murmur of voices, the faint whisper of air moving through unseen gaps. The smoke, though invisible in places, feels like part of this soundscape present in every breath. You realize that warmth, smoke, and air are all intertwined here. You cannot have one without the others. The fire gives heat, but also smoke. The openings allow smoke to escape, but also let cold air in. Everything is connected in a delicate balance. As you sit quietly, your breathing becomes slower, more even. The initial discomfort fades into the background, replaced by a steady awareness. This is how the space functions. This is how people live within it. And as the fire continues to glow softly in front of you, you begin to understand that staying warm in this world is not just about adding heat. It is about learning to live with everything that comes with it, even the parts that sting your eyes and linger in your lungs. The room settles again into its quiet rhythm, and you find yourself settling with it, accepting the smoke as part of the warmth, just as those around you have done for countless winters before. The warmth from the hearth continues to hold its fragile ground, yet your attention drifts once more to the edges of the room, to the places where the fire cannot quite reach. You notice it first along the floor, then near the doorway, and finally along the seams of the stone walls themselves. The cold is not absent. It is patient, persistent, and always searching for a way back in. You feel a thin current of air brush lightly against your ankle. It is subtle, almost easier to ignore, but once you notice it, you cannot quite forget it. It slips through unseen gaps, winding its way into the room like a quiet intruder. The fire pushes warmth outward, but the cold answers by finding every weakness. A well-known observation from historical study shows that medieval stone houses, while strong and durable, were often full of small cracks and openings that allowed drafts to enter. As you sit here, you begin to understand how much effort it must have taken to manage something so invisible, yet so constant. You watch as someone rises slowly from their place near the hearth. Their movement is unhurried, almost routine. They walk toward the wall where a faint line of darkness marks the edge of a gap between stones. Without ceremony, they take a piece of cloth and press it into the space, tucking it firmly to block the flow of air. The effect is immediate, though subtle. The draft softens. The cold retreats slightly, though never completely. It is not a permanent solution, just a small adjustment in an ongoing effort. A curious detail that appears in some accounts is that people used whatever materials they had at hand to seal drafts, including cloth scraps, straw, moss, or even packed earth. As you imagine these simple solutions, you realize how practical they are. There is no perfect barrier, only layers of resistance. You glance toward the doorway next. It is a heavy wooden structure, solid and worn, yet it does not fit perfectly within its frame. A narrow gap at the bottom allows a steady stream of cold air to slip inside. Someone has placed a rolled piece of fabric along the base, forming a soft barrier that slows the intrusion. You can almost feel the difference from where you sit. The air near the door still carries a chill, but it is less sharp than before. The fabric absorbs some of the cold, breaking its direct path into the room. Researchers often note that draft proofing in medieval homes was a continuous and imperfect task, rather than a one-time solution. As you observe these small adjustments, it becomes clear why. The materials shift, the weather changes. What works one day may need to be reinforced the next. You shift your position slightly, drawing your feet closer to the warmth of the fire. The contrast between warm and cold remains striking. It is not a gradual transition. It is a boundary you can feel clearly, like stepping from one world into another. Another lesser-known detail suggests that in some homes, people hung additional layers of fabric over doorways or windows to create a buffer zone, trapping a small pocket of warmer air. You look toward a narrow opening in the wall where a piece of cloth has been draped loosely. It moves slightly with the passing air, yet still serves its purpose, slowing the draft. There is a quiet ingenuity in these methods. Nothing here is elaborate, yet everything is purposeful. Each small barrier contributes to the larger goal of keeping warmth within reach. You notice how the stone walls themselves seem to hold the cold. Even when no visible draft exists, the surface feels cool to the touch. Stone absorbs the chill of the outside world and releases it slowly, making the room feel colder than the fire alone might suggest. This creates another challenge. It is not enough to block the air. The very structure of the house works against you. And yet people adapt, layering their defenses, adjusting their habits, learning where the cold settles most strongly. You listen again to the sounds in the room. The fire crackles softly. Fabric rustles as someone shifts. The faint whisper of air continues, though less pronounced now. It is as if the house itself breathes, drawing in and pushing out in a slow, steady rhythm. There is a moment of stillness, and you realize how much attention is given to something you might otherwise overlook. The simple act of blocking a gap, adjusting a cloth, placing a barrier at a doorway. These actions are small, but they shape the entire experience of the space. A point that continues to interest scholars is how much these everyday practices influence the overall comfort of medieval life. It is easy to focus on larger elements like the hearth or the structure of the house, but as you sit here, you begin to see how these minor adjustments make a significant difference. You lean slightly forward, letting the warmth reach your hands again. It feels a little more secure now, not because the fire has changed, but because the cold has been held back, even if only slightly. The room feels more contained, more stable. Not perfectly warm, but less exposed. There is a sense that the people here are not simply enduring the cold, but actively negotiating with it, shaping their environment in small, continuous ways. You watch as the person who sealed the gap returns to their place near the hearth. There is no acknowledgement, no need for thanks. It is simply part of what must be done. And as you settle once more into the shared warmth, you begin to understand that staying warm in this world is not just about creating heat. It's about guarding it, protecting it, holding it in place against a constant quiet pressure from the outside. The fire continues to glow, the barriers hold as best they can, and you sit within this carefully maintained balance, aware now of every dull effort that keeps the cold just a little further away. The room feels a little more contained now, though. Sharper drafts softened by cloth and careful placement, yet your attention is drawn upward and outward once again, towards something that changes not the structure of the house, but how it feels to exist within it. You begin to notice the fabrics. At first, they seem almost decorative. A length of cloth hanging loosely along one wall, a thicker piece draped across a doorway, something heavier pinned near a narrow opening that might serve as a window. But as you sit quietly and observe, their purpose becomes clearer. An established observation from domestic history reveals that textiles in medieval homes were often used not just for comfort, but as practical insulation. Stone walls, as you have already felt, hold the cold stubbornly. By covering them even partially, people could soften that effect, creating a barrier between themselves and the chill surface. You glance toward the nearest hanging cloth. It's not perfectly smooth or evenly cut. The edges are slightly rough, the weave visible even in the dim light. It might be wool thick enough to slow the movement of air, yet flexible enough to hang without rigid support. You imagine reaching out to touch it. It would feel coarse, perhaps a little uneven, but undeniably warm compared to the bare stone behind it. The fabric traps a thin layer of air, and that small pocket becomes a quiet shield against the cold. There is a gentle movement in the room as the cloth shifts slightly with the passing air. It does not stop the draft completely, but it breaks, it softens, it turns a sharp intrusion into something more manageable. A lesser-known but fascinating detail suggests that wealthier households often use tapestries not only for decoration, but specifically to improve warmth by covering large sections of wall. In simpler homes, the materials might be more modest, but the idea remains the same. Use what you have to hold on to heat. You notice how these textiles are placed with care, not randomly, but where they are needed most. Near openings, along walls that face the prevailing wind, across doorways that allow cold air to slip through too easily. Someone nearby reaches up and adjusts a hanging cloth, pulling it slightly tighter. The movement is small, almost instinctive, as it changes the way the fabric falls, reducing the gap through which air might pass. It is another quiet act of maintenance, another step in the ongoing effort to shape the environment. Some researchers have explored how the use of textiles inside homes may have varied widely depending on region, wealth, and available materials. As you sit here, you can imagine how even a single extra layer of fabric might make a noticeable difference on a bitter night. You shift your position slightly, becoming more aware of how the air feels around you. It is still cool, but less direct, less biting. The presence of these fabrics does not create warmth on their own, but they help preserve what little warmth exists. Another curious detail is that in some cases beds themselves were surrounded by curtains, forming a kind of enclosed space that trapped body heat more effectively. As you glance toward a corner of the room, you can almost picture such an arrangement, a small cocoon within the larger, colder space. The idea feels comforting. Not warmth filling the entire room, but warmth gathered and held in smaller, more intimate areas. A strategy of concentration rather than expansion. You listen again to the soft sounds around you. The fire continues its steady crackle. The fabric shifts gently. Someone nearby moves, causing a faint rustle as layers of clothing and cloth brush against each other. The entire room feels wrapped not just physically, but atmospherically. There is something calming about the way these materials soften the environment. The stone walls, which once felt hard and unyielding, now seem less severe where they are covered. The edges of the room blur slightly, replaced by textures that feel more human, more adaptable. You lean back just enough to notice the contrast. Where the wall is bare, the cold feels immediate, almost sharp. Where it is covered, the chill is muted, diffused through layers of fabric and air. An ongoing point of discussion among historians is how effective these textile barriers truly were in reducing heat loss, or whether their impact was more psychological than practical. As you sit here, the answer feels less important than the experience itself. Even a small reduction in cold can feel significant when the alternative is constant discomfort. You draw your hands closer together, letting the warmth from the hearth settle into your fingers again. The fabrics do not replace the fire, but they support it, helping to hold its influence within the room. There is a quiet harmony between these elements. The fire produces heat. The walls contain the space. The textiles soften and protect. Each part plays a role none sufficient on its own, but together, forming a system that makes survival possible. You notice how your breathing has slowed, how your body has adjusted to the rhythm of the room. The initial awareness of cold has softened into something more manageable, less urgent. The environment has not changed dramatically, but your experience of it has. And as you sit there, surrounded by flickering light-layered fabric and the steady presence of the hearth, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not a single solution. It is a collection of small, thoughtful choices, each one contributing to a fragile but meaningful sense of comfort. The cloth shifts gently once more. The fire glows steadily, and you remain within this carefully balanced space where even the simplest materials become part of the quiet effort to hold the cold at bay. The layered fabrics soften the room, the drafts feel less sharp, and the fire continues its quiet work, yet something else begins to draw your attention. It is not an object this time, but a presence, the people themselves. You notice how close everyone sits, Not out of formality, not out of politeness, but out of necessity. There is very little unused space between bodies. Shoulders nearly touch, knees rest close together. Even when someone shifts, the distance remains small, as if space itself is something too valuable to waste. You adjust slightly where you sit, becoming aware of your own position in relation to others. The warmth you feel is not only from the fire now. There is a subtle shared heat that comes from being near other living bodies. It is gentle, almost unnoticed at first, but undeniably real. A widely recognized insight from studies of daily life points out that shared body heat played a meaningful role in how people stayed warm during colder months. As you sit here, you begin to feel that truth in a very direct way. The air between people feels softer, less cold, as if it's been warmed and held in place. Someone nearby shifts closer to another. Not in a dramatic way, just a small adjustment, reducing the gap between them. No words are exchanged, none are needed. It is understood. You become aware of the quiet sounds that come with this closeness. The faint rhythm of breathing, the soft rustle of layered clothing brushing together, the occasional sigh released slowly into the shared air. These sounds blend with the crackling fire, creating a kind of gentle human warmth that extends beyond temperature. An interesting detail sometimes mentioned in historical descriptions is that families often slept in shared beds or in very close quarters, not only for practicality but also to conserve heat. As you consider this, the closeness you see now begins to feel even more significant. It is not just a moment by the hearth, it is part of a larger pattern. You glance toward a corner where two people sit shoulder to shoulder, their posture relaxed but connected. The warmth between them seems to linger, as if it has settled there over time. It is a quiet form of cooperation, one that requires no instruction. There is also a sense of comfort in this arrangement, though it may not match what you are used to. The boundaries between personal space feel different here, less defined, more fluid. Warmth in this context becomes something shared rather than owned. Some historians continue to explore whether this closeness was experienced primarily as comfort or simply accepted as a necessity of the environment. As you sit within it, the distinction feels less important. It is both practical and human at the same time. You shift your hands again, holding them closer to your body now rather than extending them fully toward the fire. The warmth seems to gather more easily this way, contained not just by the heat of the hearth, but by your own posture and proximity to others. Another small but intriguing detail suggests that in particularly harsh winters, even neighbours or extended family members might share space more closely than usual, bringing more bodies into a single room to conserve warmth. You can imagine how the air would change then, fuller, warmer, carrying the presence of many lives in one space. The idea feels both crowded and comforting at once. You listen again, letting the quiet rhythm of the room settle into you. The fire continues to glow. The fabric shifts gently. The air moves softly. And within all of this, the presence of others becomes a steady source of warmth that does not flicker or fade. You notice how no one moves abruptly. Movements are slow, deliberate, mindful of the shared space. A sudden shift would disrupt not just position, but warmth itself. Even this becomes part of the unspoken understanding that guides behaviour. You become aware of your own breathing again, matching the slow pace of the room. Inhale, exhale. The air feels slightly warmer now, not because the fire has changed, but because it has been shared past between people held close rather than allowed to drift away. There is something deeply calming about this. The idea that warmth can come not only from fire or fabric, but from presence. From simply being near others, sharing space, sharing breath, sharing the quiet experience of enduring the cold together. You glance once more at the fire, then back at the people around you. The two sources of warmth feel connected now, part of the same system. The hearth provides the initial heat. The people hold and distribute it, extending its reach in subtle ways. A point that continues to interest researchers is how social structures within households may have been influenced by this need for closeness, shaping patterns of interaction and daily life. As you sit here, it feels natural, almost inevitable. When survival depends on shared warmth, closeness becomes a form of care. You relax slightly, letting your shoulders settle, allowing the warmth around you to do its quiet work. The cold is still present at the edges, but here in this small circle of shared space it feels distant, manageable. And as you remain within this gentle closeness, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not only something you create or protect, it is something you share, something that grows stronger when held between people rather than kept apart. The fire flickers softly, the room breathes slowly, and you sit among others feeling the quiet, steady comfort of warmth that comes not just from flame, but from being together. The quiet closeness of the room settles around you, shared warmth lingering in the air, yet your thoughts begin to drift toward what happens when the fire burns lower and the night stretches longer. Sitting near the hearth offers comfort for a time, but eventually everyone must move away from it. You begin to sense that the real challenge of warmth begins not here, but when it is time to sleep. You glance toward the darker edges of the room where bedding has been arranged. It does not look like what you might expect. There is no tall frame, no elaborate structure. Instead, you see low shapes layered carefully with materials that seem simple at first, yet thoughtfully arranged. You rise slowly in your imagination and move closer, drawn by curiosity. The air feels cooler away from the fire, reminding you immediately why the bed must do more than provide rest. It must protect you from the cold that settles heavily during the night. A broadly accepted historical understanding shows that medieval sleeping arrangements were designed as much for warmth as for comfort. Beds were often positioned strategically, sometimes closer to the hearth or away from drafty openings. As you approach, you notice this careful placement. The bedding is not in the center of the room, but slightly tucked into a more sheltered corner. You lower yourself, gently feeling the surface beneath you. It is firm, not soft in the way you might expect, but layered. Straw forms the base, packed tightly to create a cushion that also traps a small amount of air. Above it there are layers of fabric, perhaps wool or linen, each one adding another barrier between your body and the cold below. You press your hand into the bedding. It yields slightly, then settles, holding its shape. There is a faint scent of dried straw and fabric, clean but earthy. It is not luxurious, but it is practical, and you begin to understand that practicality is what matters most here. A curious detail recorded in various descriptions is that bedding was often shared not just for space, but to conserve warmth. As you settle into place, you can imagine how multiple bodies would generate and retain heat within these layers, making the bed significantly warmer than the surrounding room. You draw a covering over yourself. It feels heavy, perhaps made of wool, and immediately you notice the difference. The air beneath it warms, quickly held close to your body. The cold outside the covering remains, but inside there is a small protected space. You shift slightly, adjusting the layers around you. Every movement matters. A gap left open would allow warmth to escape. A poorly arranged covering would reduce its effectiveness. Sleeping here is not passive, it requires attention even in stillness. Some historians continue to examine how different sleeping arrangements affected comfort and warmth across various social classes. As you lie here, you can imagine how even small differences in materials or space might change the experience entirely. You pull the coverings a little tighter, tucking it around your shoulders. The warmth builds gradually, not instantly. It takes time for your body heat to fill the space to create that small pocket of comfort. Patience becomes part of the process. Another interesting detail suggests that beds were sometimes surrounded by curtains or enclosed within wooden frames to trap heat more effectively. You glance around and imagine how such a structure would feel, creating a barrier between you and the colder air of the room. The idea feels comforting, like a room within a room, a space where warmth can gather and remain. You listen closely. The sounds of the fire are more distant now, softened by layers of fabric and space. The crackle is still there, but it feels farther away, less immediate. In its place, you notice other sounds, the quiet breathing of those nearby, the faint shifting of straw as someone adjusts their position, the soft rustle of coverings being pulled closer. You become aware of your own breathing again, slow and steady. The air beneath the covering feels warmer with each breath held close rather than lost to the wider room. There is a subtle sense of security in this arrangement. Not complete protection, but enough to allow rest. The cold remains outside, pressing against the edges, but here within these layers it feels held at a distance. A point of ongoing discussion among researchers is how effective these bedding strategies truly were in extreme winter conditions. As you lie here, the answer seems to depend not on perfection but on adequacy. It is not about eliminating the cold entirely, but about reducing it to a level that can be endured. You shift slightly again, finding a position that feels more comfortable, more contained. The warmth has grown, now shaped by your body and the materials around you. It is a quiet transformation, almost unnoticed as it happens. You realize that sleeping here is an extension of everything you've observed so far. The fire, the fabrics, the closeness of people, all of it leads to this moment where warmth must be held and preserved through the long hours of night. The room beyond your small cocoon fades slightly from your awareness. The edges soften, the sounds grow quieter. Your focus narrows to the space you have created, this small pocket of warmth within a larger, colder world. And as you settle deeper into the layered bedding, you begin to understand that warmth in this final stage of the day becomes something deeply personal. Not something shared openly like the hearth, but something carefully gathered and held close, allowing you to rest despite the cold that surrounds you. The fire continues to glow, somewhere beyond the room remains still, and you lie quietly within your layered shelter, feeling the slow, steady comfort that makes sleep possible in a place where warmth is never guaranteed. The warmth beneath your covering settles gently around you, but your awareness sharpens to the layers themselves. You begin to notice that what surrounds you is not random. Every material, every texture, every weight has been chosen not for luxury, but for survival. You shift slightly, letting your hand move across the surface beneath you. The straw below feels firm and dry, packed tightly enough to support your body while still allowing small pockets of air to form within it. Those tiny spaces matter more than you might expect. They trap warmth, holding it close rather than letting it slip away into the cold stone beneath. A widely recognized point in historical understanding is that straw mattresses were commonly used because they provided both cushioning and insulation. As you lie there, you can feel how effective this simple material can be. It is not soft in the modern sense, but it serves its purpose well. Above the straw, the layers become softer, more adaptable. You sense linen or wool fabrics that respond to your body, shaping themselves around you. The wool in particular feels slightly coarse, yet it holds warmth remarkably well. It does not allow the heat to escape easily, creating a barrier that works quietly but consistently. You pull the covering a little closer, noticing how its weight contributes to the sense of warmth. It presses gently against you, reducing the movement of air beneath it. This stillness helps the warmth remain where it is needed most. An intriguing detail often noted in studies of domestic life is that wool was especially valued for its insulating properties even when slightly damp. As you consider this, you realize how important such a quality would be in a time when moisture could easily find its way into the home. You adjust your position again, tucking the edges of the covering more securely around your body. The difference is immediate. The warmth feels more contained, less likely to drift away. It is a small action, yet it changes the entire experience. You notice how the layers work together. The straw provides a base that separates you from the cold ground. The linen offers a softer surface. The wool traps heat and prevents it from escaping too quickly. Each layer has its role, and none of them alone would be enough. Some researchers continue to explore how variations in bedding materials reflected differences in wealth and region. As you lie here, you can imagine how access to thicker wool or additional layers might make a significant difference on colder nights. You become aware of the faint scent of the materials. Straw carries a dry, slightly sweet smell. Wool has a deeper, more earthy tone. Linen feels cleaner, lighter. These scents blend together, creating an atmosphere that is both simple and comforting. Another lesser-known detail suggests that bedding was often refreshed or replaced periodically, especially the straw, which could become compacted or less effective over time. You can imagine the process: removing the old, bringing in new material, restoring the bed's ability to insulate. You shift your legs slightly, feeling the layers respond. They adjust, settle, and hold their shape again. There is a quiet reliability in this, a sense that the materials are working with you, not against you. The warmth beneath the covering grows, gradually shaped by your body and contained by the layers. It is not immediate, but it is steady. You begin to feel more comfortable, more at ease within this small space. A continuing discussion among historians considers how people balanced comfort with practicality in their bedding choice. As you lie here, the balance feels clear. Comfort exists, but is always tied to function. Every element must contribute to warmth. You listen again to the quiet sounds of the room. The fire is distant now, its crackle softened. The faint movements of others settling into their own spaces create a gentle rhythm. The straw beneath you shifts slightly, with each movement producing a soft whispering sound. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmer air beneath the covering fill your lungs. It feels different from the air outside, softer, less sharp. This small pocket of warmth becomes your entire world for the moment. You realize that these layers do more than protect you from the cold. They create a boundary, a separation between you and the harsher environment beyond. Within this space you can rest, recover, and prepare for the next day. The idea feels calming. Not complete warmth, not perfect comfort, but enough. Enough to sleep, enough to endure. You adjust the covering one final time, ensuring it sits securely around you. The warmth feels stable, now held in place by the careful arrangement of materials. And as you lie there, surrounded by straw, linen, and wool, you begin to understand how something so simple can be so essential. These layers, quietly working together, transform a cold stone room into a place where rest becomes possible. The fire continues to glow somewhere beyond your view. The room settles into stillness, and you remain within your carefully constructed shelter, feeling the steady, gentle warmth that these humble materials provide. The layered bedding has done its quiet work, gathering your body heat and holding it close, yet the cold still presses at the edges of the night. You begin to understand that even with straw beneath you and wool above you, some medieval families wanted one more small advantage before sleep fully claimed them. Something extra, something fleeting but deeply welcome. You picture the room before everyone settles for the night. The fire still glows at the hearth, no longer lively enough to brighten the whole house, but still strong enough to heat what needs heating. The movements around it are slow and practiced. No one rushes. By this hour, every action seems softened by fatigue and by the steady weight of winter darkness. A familiar conclusion from household history is that people in colder periods often used heated objects in bed to make the first part of the night more bearable. As you follow the scene with your imagination, you notice someone kneeling near the embers, selecting a stone that has been resting close to the fire. Not in the centre of the hottest flame where it might crack, but near enough to absorb a lasting warmth. The stone is lifted carefully, perhaps with thick cloth or a tool, then wrapped before being carried away. You can almost feel the caution in the movement. This is comfort, yes, but it is also a small controlled danger. Too hot and it could scorch bedding or skin. Too cool and it would be hardly worth the effort. You glance toward the bed space again. The wrapped stone is placed near where feet will rest, tucked beneath coverings, letting its heat sink slowly into the straw and wool. The effect must be immediate, though temporary. A patch of the bed that would otherwise feel like winter itself suddenly offers a gentle, stored warmth. A rather charming historical tidbit appears in later European traditions where bed warming pans became a recognizable object, but before such tools were widespread or affordable, simpler methods like heated stones or bricks likely served a similar purpose in many places. As you think about that, the image becomes very vivid. No polished convenience, no metal luxury for most people. Just a warm stone, a strip of cloth, and the hope that it will hold heat long enough to ease you into sleep. You lower yourself again into the imagined bedding and sense how welcome that warmth would be. Not everywhere. Just one area, perhaps at your feet or along one side, a little island of comfort in a larger sea of cold. Some historians continue to consider how common these warming methods really were across ordinary household, since written records naturally favour the more visible practices of wealthier homes. As you lie there, though, the idea feels plausible in a very human way. When winter is severe and resources are limited, people experiment, adapt, and keep whatever method proves useful. The warmth from the stone would not last all night. That is part of what makes it so interesting. It is a temporary gift, a borrowed comfort that fades slowly into the bedding. You would feel it strongest at first, then less and less, as the hours pass until your own body heat takes over, or the cold begins to return at the edges. You imagine the smell of warmed cloth, faintly mineral, touched by smoke from the hearth. The fabric wrapped around the stone might hold a memory of the fire itself. There is something soothing in that, carrying a fragment of the hearth with you into the bed. Another small practical detail emerges when you think about it longer. Heated stones would need care not just in warming, but in choosing. Certain stones can split under sudden heat. Others hold warmth better. People living close to the land would likely know, through trial, which kinds were safe and useful. It is one of those bits of household intelligence that almost never makes a grand entrance in history books, yet shapes real life quietly and constantly. You listen to the soft sounds of the room as everyone settles. Coverings shift, straw whispers beneath weight. Someone exhales with the slow relief that comes from finally lying down after a long cold day. Near the hearth, embers are drawn closer together, preserved for the morning. Across the room, the last little bed warming is already fading into the blankets. A related point that researchers continue to examine is how much of medieval domestic skill was passed through spoken habit rather than written instruction. As you watch this imagined ritual, it seems obvious that such knowledge would live in repetition. Someone older shows someone younger how warm is warm enough, how to wrap the stone, where to place it, how not to burn the bedding. No formal lesson, just winter after winter of remembered gestures. You move your feet slightly and picture them finding that stored warmth in the bed. It is probably the most satisfying moment of the whole day. Your toes numb from stone floors and cold air finally meet something kind. Not luxurious, not abundant, but merciful. There is a gentle irony here too. In a house built of strong stone in a season defined by harsh endurance, so much comfort comes down to the simplest little acts. A cloth stuffed into a crack, a hanging textile stirred into place, a body leaning closer to another. And now, a warm stone tucked beneath blankets like a secret. You breathe slowly, letting the imagined warmth expand through the scene. The room grows quieter. Outside, the wind might still move around the walls and frost might still tighten its grip on the world beyond the door, but inside, someone has found a way to smuggle a little heat into the darkness. And as you rest there thinking about that small fading warmth beneath the bedding, you begin to understand something gentle and enduring about medieval winter life. Survival was never only about large preparations and visible labour. It also depended on tiny acts of tenderness disguised as practicality. A stone warmed by the fire, a bed made less hostile, a night made slightly easier. The heat will not last forever. It does not need to. It only has to last long enough for the body to relax, for breathing to slow for sleep to arrive before the cold fully notices you again. The warmth from the bedding settles around you. The faint memory of heated stone fading gently into the layers beneath, yet your awareness drifts outward again, beyond your small cocoon towards something unexpected. You begin to notice that the boundary between inside and outside is not always as clear as you might assume. There is a faint sound, low and irregular. Not the crackle of fire, not the soft movement of fabric. Something heavier, slower. You listen more closely, letting your senses adjust. It comes again, a shift, a breath, a quiet presence just beyond the immediate space of the room. You realize as then that the household is not entirely human. A well-documented aspect of rural medieval life is that animals were often kept close to living spaces, sometimes even within the same structure, especially during winter. As you picture the layout more clearly, you understand why. The cold does not distinguish between people and livestock. Survival encourages proximity. You imagine a small partition, perhaps wooden or woven, separating part of the room, or an adjoining space where animals rest. A cow, maybe a goat, possibly a few chickens tucked into a sheltered corner. Their presence is not loud, not intrusive, but steady. You listen again. A slow exhale, the faint shifting of weight, the soft scrape of hoof against ground. These sounds blend into the rhythm of the house, becoming part of the night rather than a disruption. At first, the idea might seem unusual, even uncomfortable. Sharing space with animals is not something you are accustomed to, yet here it carries a practical purpose that becomes clearer the longer you consider it. Animals generate heat. It is not dramatic, not enough to warm a room entirely, but noticeable. A living body gives off warmth, and several together create a subtle increase in temperature. In a place where every degree matters, that contribution becomes meaningful. A lesser known but often mentioned detail is that the warmth from animals could help reduce the severity of indoor cold, particularly in smaller or more enclosed spaces. As you lie quietly, you begin to sense how that might feel. The air is still cool, but perhaps slightly less harsh than it would be otherwise. You also notice another layer to this arrangement. The presence of animals creates a certain atmosphere. A faint scent, earthy and unmistakable, lingers in the background. It is not overwhelming, but it is part of the environment woven into the fabric of daily life. You shift slightly under your covering, adjusting to this awareness. It is different, but not entirely unpleasant. Just another reminder that life here is closely connected, human and animal sharing the same shelter against the same cold. Some historians continue to examine how common it was for animals to be housed within living spaces, as practices likely varied by region and by the size of the dwelling. As you imagine this particular home, it feels like a practical solution shaped by necessity rather than preference. You listen again to the quiet sounds. The fire now softer, the breathing of those nearby, and beneath it all the steady presence of animals adding their own rhythm to the night. Another small but interesting detail suggests that keeping animals close also had the advantage of protection, not just from the cold but from theft or predators. In a way, the arrangement serves multiple purposes at once, just like so many other aspects of life here. You consider how this shared space would feel over time, the boundaries between different parts of life becoming less rigid. Work, rest, shelter all overlapping. The house is not divided into separate specialized rooms. It is a flexible environment adapting to needs as they arise. You draw a slow breath, noticing how the air feels slightly warmer near the center of the room, where both people and animals contribute to the overall warmth. It is subtle, but it is there a quiet reinforcement of everything else you have observed. There is also a sense of reassurance in this closeness. The presence of other living beings, even animals, adds to the feeling that you are not alone against the cold. There is a shared endurance, a collective holding on through the long winter night. You adjust your position once more, settling deep into the bedding. The warmth you have gathered remains supported now by everything around you. The fire, the fabrics, the bodies, and even the animals nearby all contribute in small ways. A continuing point of discussion among researchers is how these living arrangements influence daily routines and comfort. As you lie here, the answer feels less theoretical and more immediate. It shapes everything. The sounds, the smells, the warmth, the very feeling of the space. The night grows quieter still, movement slow, breathing deepens. Even the animals seem to settle into a steady calm. You feel your body relaxing, your awareness softening. The cold remains outside, pressing against stone and wood, but inside there is a fragile balance carefully maintained through many small choices. And as you drift gently within this shared space, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not created by one single source. It is gathered from many places, each contributing just enough to make the difference between discomfort and rest. The fire glows softly, the room breathes quietly, and you lie surrounded by life itself, feeling the subtle collective warmth that carries you further into the stillness of the night. The quiet presence of animals fades gently into the background as your attention drifts once more toward the hearth. Even from your place within the bedding, you can still sense its glow. A steady pulse of warmth that continues to shape everything around it. And now, as you follow that faint light with your thoughts, you begin to notice something else. The fire is not only for warmth, it's also preparing the next small comfort of the night. You listen closely, and beneath the softer crackle of embers there is a subtle sound. A faint simmer. The pot you noticed earlier has not been forgotten. It remains suspended above the heat, quietly transforming its contents into something that will do more than fill the stomach. A commonly understood aspect of medieval domestic life is that cooking fires served a dual purpose, providing both heat and nourishment at the same time. As you imagine the scene more clearly, you see how natural this arrangement is. There is no separate system for cooking and heating. One fire must do everything. You picture someone rising slowly from their place, moving toward the hearth with careful steps. They lift the pot slightly, checking its contents, perhaps stirring gently. Steam rises in a soft cloud, carrying with it a scent that spreads through the room. It is warm, rich and simple. Perhaps a broth, perhaps a stew, something that has been simmering slowly, drawing flavour from whatever ingredients are available. Roots, grains, bits of preserved meat if fortune has allowed it. You can almost taste it now, that deep, comforting warmth that begins in the mouth and travels slowly through the body. It is not elaborate, not refined, but it is exactly what is needed. A small but engaging detail sometimes noted in accounts of winter living is that meals during colder months were often thicker and more substantial, designed to provide lasting energy and warmth. As you imagine lifting a spoonful of this stew, you understand why. It is not just food, it is fuel against the cold. You shift slightly beneath your covering, feeling how the idea of warmth changes. The fire warms from the outside. The bedding holds heat around you. But food, warm and nourishing, works from within. You imagine yourself sitting up slightly, receiving a simple bowl, the surface steaming gently in the dim light. Your hands would feel the warmth through the container before you even begin to eat. That alone would be a comfort. You take a slow, imagined taste. It is hot, but not painfully so. Just enough to remind you that warmth can travel inward, spreading through your chest, easing the chill that lingers deep inside. Some historians continue to explore how much medieval diets shifted with the seasons, particularly in terms of caloric intake and the types of foods consumed in winter. As you sit with this imagined meal, it becomes clear that the choices made were shaped by both availability and necessity. Another curious detail is that in some households, cooking might continue intermittently throughout the evening, not only to prepare food, but to maintain the fire itself. A pot kept over the embers helps regulate the heat, preventing the flames from dying too quickly. You glance again toward the hearth, in your mind noticing how everything is connected. The fire cooks the food strengthens the body generates heat, and that heat contributes, however slightly, to the warmth of the room. It is a quiet cycle repeating day after day. You listen again to the sounds, the soft bubbling of the pot, the occasional shift of someone tending it, the steady breathing of those settling down for the night. The room feels fuller now, not just with warmth, but with a sense of completion. There is also a certain comfort in routine. The knowledge that this simple meal, this shared warmth, will come again tomorrow and the day after, as long as supplies last and the fire continues to burn. A topic that remains open to interpretation among scholars is how evenly food was distributed within households during winter months, especially when resources were limited. As you imagine this quiet scene, you sense that sharing would be essential, though not always equal. You lower yourself again into the bedding, feeling the warmth of both fire and imagined food lingering in your body. It is a different kind of comfort now, one that feels more complete. The cold outside still presses against the walls. The stone still holds its chill. But inside, warmth exists in layers. Fire fabric sheds space, and now nourishment all working together. You draw a slow breath, noticing how your body feels more relaxed, more settled. The warmth from within seems to meet the warmth from without, creating a sense of balance. And as the room grows quieter still, the pot is lowered. The fire is left to its gentle glow, and you remain wrapped in layers of warmth that extend beyond the physical. You begin to understand that in this world, survival through winter is not achieved by one single method. It is built from many small acts, each one adding to the next, each one contributing just enough. The fire continues its steady burn, The last traces of steam fade into the air, and you lie quietly feeling the combined warmth of flame food and shelter carrying you deeper into the calm of the night. The warmth from the meal lingers within you gentle and steady. Yet as the night deepens, you begin to notice another layer to how the body holds heat. It is not only what surrounds you, or what you consume, it is also what you wear, even here beneath coverings long after the fire has softened into embers. You shift slightly under the layers and become aware that no one truly sleeps in light clothing. Even indoors, even near the hearth, garments remain part of the defense against the cold. A widely accepted understanding from studies of medieval life is that people often wore multiple layers of clothing indoors during winter, sometimes even while sleeping. As you imagine yourself more clearly in this space, you feel those layers against your skin. Linen closest to the body, softer and more breathable. Wool above it thicker, heavier, designed to trap warmth and resist the chill. You move your arms slowly, noticing how the fabric responds. It does not flow loosely. It holds shape, creating small pockets of air that warm gradually. These pockets become tiny reservoirs of heat carried with you wherever you shift. There is a quiet practicality in this. The clothing you wear during the day does not simply disappear at night. It becomes part of your bedding, part of your insulation. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves more than one purpose. You pull the covering slightly closer, feeling how it presses against the layers beneath. Together, they create a barrier that feels more complete, more secure. The cold still exists, but it feels further away now, held back by fabric and warmth working together. A small but intriguing detail appears in descriptions of winter clothing, noting that wool garments were often valued for their ability to retain heat even in less than ideal conditions. As you consider this, you understand why such materials would be essential. Warmth must be reliable, not delicate. You listen quietly to the room. The fire has settled into a low glow, its crackle now softer, more occasional. The sounds of movement have nearly faded, replaced by slow breathing and the faint shifting of fabric as people settle deeper into rest. You notice how the clothing contributes to this stillness. It reduces the need for constant adjustment. It allows the body to remain warm even when the fire no longer provides strong heat. Some historians continue to explore how clothing practices varied between different regions and social groups, especially during colder months. As you lie here, you can imagine how additional layers or higher quality materials might make a noticeable difference in comfort. You adjust your position slightly, feeling the layers settle around you again. There is a sense of being held not tightly, but securely. The clothing moves with you, maintaining that small envelope of warmth. Another lesser-known detail suggests that night garments could sometimes differ slightly from day wear, offering more flexibility or comfort but still serving the same essential purpose of insulation. You imagine looser sleeves, perhaps softer fabric, yet still layered enough to protect against the chill. You draw a slow breath, noticing how the warmth feels more consistent now. It is not concentrated in one place like the fur, it is distributed, carried with you, sustained by what you wear. There is something reassuring in that. The idea that even as the external source of heat fades, you carry your own protection built from simple materials and thoughtful layering. You become aware again of the edges of the room where the cold still lingers. It has not disappeared. It waits beyond your coverings, beyond your clothing, pressing quietly against the boundaries of your small warm space. Yet here within these layers it feels distant. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how people balance the need for warmth with the need for mobility and comfort in their clothing. As you lie still, the balance seems clear. Warmth comes first. Comfort follows, shaped by the necessity rather than preference. You listen once more to the quiet rhythm of the house, the breathing of others steady and calm, the faint sound of an animal shifting in the distance, the soft whisper of fabric as someone turns slightly in their sleep. Everything feels slower, now more settled. You let your body relax further into the bedding, allowing the layers to do their work without interruption. The warmth feels stable, sustained not by a single source but by many small ones working together. And as you drift deeper into this quiet state, you begin to understand that clothing, like everything else in this world, is not just about covering the body. It is about preserving warmth, extending it, carrying it with you into the long hours of night. The fire continues to glow faintly. The room rests in stillness, and you remain wrapped in layers that hold the cold at bay, allowing sleep to come gently without resistance. The layered clothing and bedding hold their quiet warmth around you, steady and reassuring. Yet even as your body begins to relax, you sense something else beneath the stillness. The cold has not vanished. It waits just beyond the fragile circle of comfort, ready to return if given the chance. You notice that even indoors, even at rest, the body remains prepared. No one has fully surrendered to ease. There is always a readiness, a quiet awareness that warmth must be maintained, not assumed. A widely recognized point from studies of medieval daily life is that people often remained partially dressed even while indoors and at night, ensuring they could respond quickly to changes in temperature or need. As you lie there, you feel that truth in your own stillness. The layers you wear are not simply for comfort. They are part of a constant state of preparedness. You shift slightly, adjusting your position beneath the coverings. The warmth follows you, but only because you move carefully, preserving it. A sudden motion would let cold air slip in. A careless movement could undo the delicate balance you have built. You listen to the room again. The fire is quieter now, its strength reduced to a low glow. It is no longer the dominant force it was earlier. Instead, it supports the warmth that has already been gathered and stored in bodies, fabrics, and bedding. There is a faint creak somewhere, perhaps wood settling, or someone shifting gently in their sleep. The sound feels amplified in the quiet, then fades again into stillness. A curious detail sometimes noted in accounts of indoor life is that people often wore head coverings even while sleeping to reduce heat loss. As you imagine this, you can feel how much warmth might escape from uncovered skin. Covering the head becomes another small but meaningful step in conserving heat. You draw your covering slightly higher instinctively, protecting more of your body. The difference is subtle but real. Warmth is not just something you feel, it is something you guard. Some historians continue to explore how individuals balance the need for warmth with the desire for comfort and ease of movement. As you lie here, the answer seems simple. Warmth takes priority. Comfort adapts around it. You notice how still the room has become. The earlier sounds of quiet activity have faded almost completely. What remains is the slow, steady rhythm of rest. Breathing soft and even, the occasional shift careful and measured. Even in sleep, the body seems aware of its surroundings, adjusting slightly to maintain warmth. A covering is pulled closer. A position is changed just enough to preserve comfort without exposing too much to the cold. Another interesting detail suggests that in colder conditions, people might sleep closer together than usual, even sharing limited space more tightly during the night. You can imagine how that would feel, the shared warmth, extending into sleep, not just waking hours. You shift your legs slightly, feeling the layers respond, holding their warmth in place. The cold does not rush in. It waits at the edges, held back by fabric, by closeness, by careful stillness. There is a sense of quiet vigilance in this. Not tense, not anxious, but present. The awareness that warmth is temporary, that it must be preserved through small, continuous actions. You listen again, letting the silence settle deeper. The faint crackle of the hearth is now barely audible. The room feels suspended between warmth and cold, between wakefulness and sleep. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how much of this awareness was conscious and how much became instinctive over time. As you lie here, it feels like both. At first, it might require thought. Eventually, it becomes habit, something the body does without needing to decide. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your small space. It is enough. Not abundant, not overwhelming, but sufficient. And in this environment, sufficiency is everything. You allow your body to settle more fully now, trusting the layers, the positioning, the quiet balance that has been created. The need to move fades, the desire to remain still grows stronger, and as you drift further into rest, you begin to understand that even in sleep, warmth is not passive. It is something you maintain through awareness, through preparation, through the simple act of staying within the boundaries that keep the cold away. The room remains quiet. The fire dim, the cold waiting patiently beyond the walls, and you lie within your carefully held space feeling the steady, quiet warmth that carries you deeper into the night. The stillness of the room deepens your body resting within its careful layers, yet your awareness shifts once more, not to the bedding or the fire this time, but to the very materials that make all of this possible, the fabrics themselves. You begin to sense that not all cloth is equal, and that the difference between warmth and discomfort may lie in the smallest details of what touches your skin. You move your hand slowly beneath the covering, feeling the contrast between layers. The inner fabric feels lighter, smoother, perhaps linen. It rests gently against your skin, allowing a certain softness, a kind of quiet breathability. Above it, the wool is heavier, coarser yet undeniably effective in holding warmth. A well-supported observation from historical textile study shows that linen and wool were among the most commonly used fabrics in medieval Europe, each serving a distinct purpose. Linen made from flax offered comfort and helped manage moisture, while wool provided insulation and retained heat. As you lie there, you begin to understand how these materials work together. Linen closest to the body absorbs slight dampness, keeping your skin from feeling chilled. Wool above traps the heat your body produces, preventing it from escaping too quickly into the cold air beyond. You shift slightly, feeling how the fabrics respond. The linen moves easily, adjusting to your body without resistance. The wool holds its position more firmly, maintaining its shape and preserving the small pocket of warmth around you. A subtle but fascinating detail sometimes mentioned is that wool fibers naturally create tiny air pockets which contribute significantly to their insulating properties. As you imagine those invisible spaces, you realize that warmth here is not just about thickness, but about structure. You draw a slow breath, noticing how the warmth feels more even, now less concentrated in one area. The fabrics distribute it, allowing it to settle across your body in a gentle, consistent way. Some researchers continue to explore how the availability and quality of textiles influence daily comfort, particularly during colder seasons. As you consider this, it becomes clear that access to better materials could make a meaningful difference, even if the overall conditions remain challenging. You notice the faint scent of the fabrics again. Linen carries a clean, slightly dry note, while wool brings a deeper, more grounded aroma. Together they create a sense of familiarity, something that feels lived in and reliable. Another interesting detail suggests that wool garments and blankets were often reused, repaired and maintained over long periods, making them valuable household items. You can imagine the care taken to preserve them, to mend small tears to ensure they remain effective through many winters. You shift your shoulders slightly, feeling the wool settle back into place. It holds warmth, steadily resisting the cold that presses from beyond the coverings. There is a quiet strength in this material, a reliability that does not depend on constant adjustment. You listen again to the room. The fire is now little more than a soft glow. The sounds of others have nearly faded into silence. The air feels still, held in place by the layers that surround you. There is also a sense of balance in how these fabrics interact. Linen prevents discomfort from moisture. Wool prevents loss of heat. Together they create a system that supports the body through the long hours of night. A point that continues to invite discussion among historians is how textile production and availability shaped everyday life in medieval communities. As you lie here, you can imagine how spinning, weaving, and maintaining these materials would be as essential as gathering firewood or storing food. You become aware again of your own warmth, steady and contained. It does not come from a single source, but from the interaction of many small elements working together. You adjust the covering slightly, feeling how even a small change in position affects the distribution of warmth. The fabrics respond immediately, reshaping the space around you. There is something deeply reassuring in this responsiveness. The materials adapt to you, supporting your need for warmth without requiring constant attention. You draw another slow breath, letting the calm of the room settle more deeply. The cold remains outside your small cocoon, held back by layers of cloth and the quiet knowledge of how to use them. And as you rest within this carefully arranged system, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not just about fire or shelter. It is about understanding materials, about using what is available in thoughtful ways. The fabrics hold their gentle warmth, the room remains still, and you lie quietly supported by layers that have been shaped by generations of knowledge, allowing you to drift further into the calm of the winter night. The warmth within your layered cocoon holds steady, quiet, and dependable, yet your thoughts begin to drift away from stillness and toward movement. Even in winter, even in the deepest cold, life does not simply pause. It changes shape. You listen carefully, and though the room is now mostly settled, you can imagine what filled these same hours earlier in the evening. Hands at work, small tasks continuing long after the light outside has faded. Winter does not remove labour, it redirects it. A widely accepted insight from social history explains that during the coldest months, much of the work that would normally take place outdoors shifts indoors. As you picture the room before sleep, you can see it clearly. Someone seated near the hearth using the available light and warmth to mend clothing. Another shaping a simple wooden tool. A pair of hands twisting fibres into thread. The fire is not only a source of warmth, it becomes a source of opportunity, allowing work to continue even when the outside world is dark and frozen. You imagine yourself sitting upright, again wrapped in layers, hands extended just close enough to the fire to remain nimble. Too far and your fingers stiffen with cold. Too close and the heat becomes uncomfortable. There is a careful balance learned through repetition. A small but revealing detail often mentioned in studies of daily life is that winter evenings were a common time for textile work such as spinning or weaving, tasks that required patience rather than physical strength. As you consider this, you can almost hear the quiet rhythm of a spindle turning, the soft pull of fibres being drawn into thread. You notice how these activities fit naturally into the environment. They do not demand large movements or wide spaces. They can be done while seated close to the hearth within the shared warmth of the room. Some historians continue to examine how the seasonal shift in labour affected social interactions, suggesting that winter may have been a time of increased indoor collaboration. As you imagine multiple people working quietly side by side, it feels less like isolation and more like a different kind of togetherness. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, picturing how even small tasks would feel in this environment. Your hands would warm slowly, then cool again if left idle. Every movement would be measured, conserving energy while still accomplishing what is needed. Another interesting detail suggests that tools themselves were sometimes kept near the hearth to prevent them from becoming too cold or brittle. You can imagine a wooden handle resting close to the fire, absorbing just enough warmth to remain usable. You listen again to the memory of the room in motion. The soft scrape of wood, the faint rustle of fibres, the occasional murmur of voices low and unhurried. It is a quiet productivity shaped by a necessity rather than urgency. You begin to understand that winter does not eliminate purpose, it simply slows, it refines, it brings it closer to the centre of the home. There is also a sense of continuity in these tasks. The same hands that gathered wood, that sealed drafts, that prepared bedding now continue their work in a different form. Everything connects, each action supporting the next. A point that remains under discussion among researchers is how much of this indoor labour was planned in advance versus adapted spontaneously to the conditions of the season. As you imagine the scene, it feels like a blend of both. Some tasks are expected, others arise as needed. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth still held within your layers. The idea of movement now feels distant, replaced by rest, yet the memory of those earlier activities lingers. You realise that the warmth of the hearth supports more than comfort. It supports continuity of life. Without it, hands would grow too cold to work, materials too stiff to handle, time too long to endure. You shift your fingers slightly beneath the covering, feeling their warmth, imagining how different they would feel without that steady heat earlier in the evening. There is a quiet appreciation in this awareness. The fire does not just protect, it enables. You listen once more to the stillness of the room as it is now. The work is done for the day. The tools are set aside. The hands that moved with quiet purpose now rest. And as you lie there, surrounded by the memory of movement and the presence of warmth, you begin to understand that survival in winter is not only about enduring the cold, but about continuing life within it. adapting each action to the rhythm of the season. The fire glows softly. The room remains calm and you drift further into rest, carrying with you the quiet sense of work completed and warmth preserved. The memory of quiet work fades and the room settles deeper into stillness, yet the night itself is far from gentle. You begin to notice how the cold changes as darkness deepens. It is not the same as earlier. It feels heavier now, more persistent, as if the world outside has fully surrendered to winter. You draw a slow breath beneath your coverings and sense the difference. The warmth you have gathered still holds, but the pressure of the cold beyond it feels stronger. The stone walls seem to radiate a deeper chill, one that builds gradually as the hours pass. A well-supported observation from historical climate studies indicates that temperatures often dropped significantly after nightfall, especially in winter when the absence of sunlight allowed cold to settle more intensely. As you lie here, you feel that truth quietly surrounding you. The fire, once lively, now rests in a quieter state. Its glow is softer, its heat more subtle. It continues to give what it can, but it is no longer enough to influence the entire room. Its role has shifted from warming to sustaining. You listen carefully. The crackle has become occasional, almost hesitant. A small shift of embers, a faint pop, then silence again. The fire is alive, but only just. You become more aware of the boundaries of your warmth. Beneath your coverings, the air is still gentle, shaped by your body and the layers around you. Beyond that, the room feels cooler, the difference more noticeable than before. A small but telling detail noted in various accounts is that nighttime cold in medieval homes could feel especially intense, because there were few ways to maintain consistent heat once the fire began to fade. As you sense the growing chill, you understand how important earlier preparations have been. You shift slightly, instinctively pulling the covering closer. The movement is careful, measured. You do not want to disturb the balance you have created. Even a small opening could allow the cold to slip in more easily now. Some historians continue to explore how people adapted their sleeping habits to these nightly temperature changes, suggesting that positioning, layering, and shared space all played critical roles. As you lie here, the importance of each of those choices becomes clear. You listen again to the room. The breathing of others is slower now, deeper settled into sleep. The occasional movement is softer, less frequent. Even the animals nearby seem quieter, their presence reduced to a steady, gentle rhythm. Another interesting detail suggests that people sometimes added extra layers or adjusted bedding during the night if they woke from the cold. You can imagine someone stirring, slightly pulling a covering tighter, then settling again into stillness. You become aware of your own body once more. The warmth you feel is not constant in intensity. It shifts slightly, responding to your position, to the movement of air, to the slow cooling of the room. There is a moment where you feel the edge of the cold press a little closer, a subtle change that prompts you to adjust again. You tuck the covering more securely around your shoulders, reducing the space where warmth might escape. The difference is immediate, though small. The warmth returns to a steadier state held within the layers you have arranged. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how much of this nightly adjustment was conscious and how much became instinctive over time. As you experience it now, it feels almost automatic. Your body responds without needing to think. You listen to the faint sounds beyond the walls, perhaps the wind moving across the landscape, though it reaches you only as a distant suggestion. The house itself absorbs much of it, yet you can still sense the outside world cold and vast. Inside, everything feels smaller, more contained. The warmth you have is not expansive, it is focused, concentrated in the spaces you have created. You draw another slow breath, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The air beneath your coverings remains warmer, softer, a small refuge against the growing cold of the night. There is a quiet resilience in this moment. The cold increases, but so does your awareness of how to manage it. You adjust, you hold, you remain within the boundaries that keep you comfortable. You realize that night in this world is not simply a time of rest. It is a period of careful balance, where warmth must be preserved against a slow but steady decline in external temperature. The fire continues its faint glow, The room rests in near silence, and you lie within your layered shelter, feeling the subtle shifts of warmth and cold as the night deepens. And as you remain there calm and still, you begin to understand that surviving the cold is not about defeating it entirely, but about enduring its strongest moments with quiet patience. The darkness settles fully. The cold presses gently against the edges of your space, and you drift further into rest, held by the warmth you have carefully maintained. The night has settled fully now, deep and quiet, yet the warmth you hold does not sustain itself without care. Even as most of the room drifts into sleep, there is still a quiet awareness you're tied to the hearth. The fire may be small, but it is never entirely forgotten. You sense it first in the faint shift of sound, a soft movement near the hearth. Not loud enough to disturb, just enough to remind you that someone is still watching over the embers. An established conclusion from household practice suggests that medieval families often tried to keep a fire alive overnight rather than letting it go out completely, since relighting it in the morning could be difficult. As you imagine the scene more clearly, you see someone rise slowly, wrapped in layers, moving carefully through the dim light. Their steps are quiet, deliberate. The goal is not to wake others, only to tend the fire just enough to preserve it. You listen closely as they reach the hearth. There is a faint scraping sound as embers are drawn together, concentrating the remaining heat. A small piece of wood is added, not enough to create a strong flame, just enough to feed the glow. A subtle but practical detail appears in many descriptions of fire tending, noting that ashes could be used to cover embers, helping them retain heat for longer periods. You can imagine the careful motion ash gently spread, creating a kind of insulated layer that protects the warmth beneath. The fire responds quietly. A soft glow strengthens slightly, then steadies again. It is not meant to flare, it is meant to endure. You feel a sense of reassurance in this small act. The fire is not left to chance, it is guided, maintained, preserved through the long hours of darkness. Some historians continue to explore how different households manage their fires overnight, particularly in terms of fuel availability and routine. As you consider this, you realize how much depends on experience. Knowing how much wood to add, how to arrange the embers, how to balance warmth with conservation. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, aware of how important that steady glow is, even at a distance. Without it, the room would grow colder more quickly. With it, there is at least a baseline of warmth, a foundation that supports everything else. Another interesting detail suggests that in some cases people might restart a fire in the morning using preserved embers rather than striking a new flame. This makes the overnight tending even more significant. It is not just about comfort during the night, but about easing the transition into the next day. You listen as the person at the hearth finishes their task. There is a brief pause as if they are observing the fire, ensuring it will hold. Then they return quietly to their place, the sound of their movement fading into the stillness. The room settles once more. The fire remains its glow soft but steady. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your coverings remain stable. The cold outside continues its quiet pressure, but the presence of the fire, even in this reduced state, makes a difference. There is something deeply calming about this continuity. The idea that the fire, like the people it serves, endures through the night, not with great intensity, but with persistence. A point that remains under discussion among researchers is how much of this fire tending was assigned to specific individuals versus shared among members of the household. As you imagine the quiet cooperation involved, it feels like a shared responsibility carried out without the need for the formal roles. You become aware again of the rhythm of the room, breathing slow and even, the faint shifting of fabric, the distant presence of animals, and beneath it all the steady glow of the hearth. You adjust your position slightly, feeling the layers hold their warmth. The fire does not need to reach you directly. Its influence is indirect, now supporting the overall balance of the space. You realize that warmth here is not about intensity. It is about continuity. The fire does not need to burn brightly all night, it only needs to remain alive. And as you lie there listening to the quiet persistence of the embers, you begin to understand that survival in this environment depends as much on maintenance as it does on creation. The fire glows softly, the room remains still, and you rest within a space where even in sleep, Small acts of care continue to shape the night. The embers hold their quiet glow, the room resting in a fragile balance between warmth and cold, and as you lie there, your awareness shifts gently toward the people themselves. Not everyone experiences this night in the same way. You begin to notice how age shapes the rhythm of winter. You listen more closely to the breathing around you. Some breaths are deep and steady, belonging to those whose bodies have grown accustomed to the cold through years of repetition. Others are lighter, less regular, hinting at a different experience entirely. A well-grounded understanding from social history suggests that children and older individuals were often more vulnerable to cold conditions, their bodies less able to regulate temperature effectively. As you imagine the room more clearly, you begin to see how care might naturally gather around them. You picture a child sleeping closer to the center of the bed, surrounded by others, their small form tucked securely beneath layers of fabric. The coverings are drawn more carefully around them, edges tucked in with quiet precision. Warmth is not left to chance here. You can almost feel the difference in how that warmth is held. Smaller bodies lose heat more quickly, and so they are placed where the shared warmth is strongest. It is a simple adjustment, but one that carries quiet importance. A gentle but telling detail often noted in accounts of family life is that children might share beds with parents or siblings, not only for space, but to ensure they remained warm through the night. As you consider this, the closeness you observed earlier takes on an even deeper meaning. You shift slightly, imagining how that shared space would feel. The warmth of multiple bodies, the steady presence of others, creating a more stable environment for those who need it most. At the same time, your attention turns to the older members of the household. Their movements earlier in the evening may have been slower, more deliberate. Now in rest, their stillness carries a different weight. Some historians continue to examine how aging affected daily survival in colder environments, particularly in terms of mobility and resilience. As you lie here, you can imagine how the cold might feel sharper, more persistent for those whose bodies no longer adapt as easily. You notice how coverings might be arranged more carefully for them as well. Extra layers tighter, folds, small adjustments made quietly before sleep. These are not grand gestures, but they matter. Another interesting detail suggests that in some cases families prioritize warmth for the most vulnerable members, ensuring they received better placement near the hearth or within shared bedding. You can see how this would unfold naturally, shaped by care rather than formal rules. You listen again to the room, a soft, uneven breath from one side, a quiet sigh from another. These small sounds carry meaning, hinting at different experiences within the same space. You draw a slow breath yourself, feeling the warmth within your own layers. It feels steady, manageable, yet you are now more aware that this experience is not identical for everyone around you. There is a quiet attentiveness in this realization. Even in rest, there is a sense of looking after one another, of arranging space and resources in ways that support those who need it most. A point that continues to invite discussion among researchers is how family structures and responsibilities adapted to seasonal challenges like winter. As you imagine the subtle adjustments studied here, it feels less like a structured system and more like an instinctive response. You shift your position slightly, careful not to disturb the warmth you have gathered. The room remains still, yet beneath that stillness, there is a quiet network of care woven into the way people share space. You notice how the warmth feels slightly stronger toward the center of the room where more bodies are gathered. It is not dramatic, but it is enough to make a difference. Another small but meaningful detail is that coverings themselves might be shared or redistributed depending on need, ensuring that no one is left too exposed. You can imagine a blanket being pulled gently over a sleeping form, an unconscious act of care carried out in the quiet of night. You listen once more, letting the rhythm of the room settle around you. The fire continues its soft glow. The air remains still. The cold presses quietly at the edges. And within this space you begin to understand that warmth is not only a physical condition, it is also a shared responsibility shaped by attention, by small acts, by the way people arrange themselves in relation to one another. You relax slightly, letting that awareness settle into you. The warmth you feel is supported not just by fire and fabric, but by the presence of others who contribute knowingly or not to the balance of the room. The night continues calm and steady, and you lie within this shared space feeling the quiet influence of care that moves gently through the darkness, holding everyone just a little closer to comfort. The shared warmth holds steady around you, shaped by careful placement and quiet acts of care, yet your thoughts begin to drift towards something less visible, something that lingers beneath the surface of comfort. The cold is not only uncomfortable, at times it can be dangerous. You lie still, feeling the warmth within your coverings, and begin to consider what happens when that warmth is not enough, when the balance shifts too far, when the body cannot keep up with the demands of the environment. A widely supported conclusion from medical history suggests that prolonged exposure to cold could lead to illness, particularly in conditions where nutrition, shelter, and warmth were already limited. As you rest here, you sense how thin the line can be between comfort and risk. You imagine waking in the night not from restlessness, but from a creeping chill that has found its way through layers of fabric. Your hands feel colder, your breath feels sharper. The warmth you gathered has weakened, and the cold presses closer than before. You shift beneath the coverings, instinctively pulling them tighter, trying to restore that fragile balance. Most of the time this is enough, but not always. A small but telling detail often mentioned in historical descriptions is that dampness could make the cold far more severe, increasing the risk of illness. As you think about the stone walls, the moisture in the air, the possibility of condensation forming in unseen corners, you begin to understand how easily conditions could change. You draw a slow breath, noticing how the air feels slightly heavier, perhaps carrying a trace of that dampness. It is subtle, but it adds another layer to the experience of cold. Some historians continue to explore how seasonal illnesses were influenced by living conditions, including indoor temperature and ventilation. As you lie here, it becomes clear that warmth is not only about comfort, it is about protection. You listen again to the room. The steady breathing of others suggests that most are resting well, their warmth holding. But you can imagine how a single weak point, a poorly sealed draft, a thinner covering, could make a difference for someone more vulnerable. Another interesting detail suggests that certain remedies or practices were used in an attempt to counter the effects of cold, though their effectiveness varied widely. You can imagine simple efforts, drinking something warm, adding another layer, moving closer to others. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth return as you adjust your position. The layers respond, holding the heat in place once more. It is a quiet reassurance, a reminder that small actions can restore balance. You become aware again of your own body. The warmth in your chest, the slight coolness at your fingertips, the way your breath feels within the small space beneath your covering. It is a constant interaction, your body working to maintain its own temperature while relying on the environment to support it. A point that remains under discussion among researchers is how much people understood about the causes of illness related to cold exposure and how they interpreted these experiences within the knowledge available to them. As you consider this, you realize that regardless of explanation, the response would be practical. Stay warm, stay covered, stay close. You listen once more to the quiet rhythm of the house. The fire continues its faint glow. The fabrics hold their place. The shared warmth remains. Yet beneath all of this, there is an awareness that the cold is not passive. It is active in its own quiet way, always seeking to enter, always testing the boundaries that have been set. You pull your covering slightly higher, ensuring that no part of you is left exposed. The warmth settles again, steady and sufficient. There is a calm in this adjustment. Not fear, but awareness. The understanding that comfort requires attention, that safety is built from small, consistent actions. Another subtle detail suggests that even the position of the body could influence warmth, curling inward to reduce exposed surface area, conserving heat more effectively. You notice how naturally this position comes to you now, your body adapting without needing instruction. You draw another slow breath, feeling the warmth stabilize once more. The moment of vulnerability passes, replaced by a steady calm, and as you lie there held within layers of fabric supported by the presence of others, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not only about creating comfort, it is about guarding against the quiet risks that come with the cold. The room remains still. The night continues and you rest within a carefully maintained balance, where warmth and safety exist together, sustained by awareness and care. The balance of warmth and caution settles gently around you. Yet as the night continues, your thoughts begin to stretch beyond this single moment and into something broader. You start to sense that what you're experiencing is not just a series of isolated actions, but part of a larger rhythm that repeats itself across the entire season. Winter reshapes everything. You lie still, breathing slowly, and imagine how life must feel across weeks and months of cold. The routines you have observed tonight are not occasional. They are constant, repeated day after day, forming patterns that define how people live through this time. A well-supported interpretation from seasonal studies suggests that medieval households developed distinct winter routines that differed significantly from those of warmer months. As you reflect on everything you have seen, it becomes clear how those routines take shape. You picture mornings that begin slowly with the careful revival of the fire from preserved embers. The first warmth of the day does not arrive instantly. It must be coaxed back into life just as it was maintained through the night. You imagine the gradual return of movement, people rising, still wrapped in layers, moving toward the hearth, gathering close as the fire strengthens. The day begins not with sudden activity, but with a quiet rebuilding of warmth. A small but meaningful detail often noted is that daylight hours during winter were shorter, influencing how much could be accomplished and when. As you consider this, you realize how closely life would be tied to the available light and heat. You follow the rhythm further. Tasks shift indoors as you have already sensed. Time is spent mending, preparing, maintaining. The energy of the household turns inward, focused on preservation rather than expansion. Some historians continue to explore how these seasonal rhythms affected social structures and daily interactions, suggesting that winter may have encouraged more time spent together within the home. As you imagine this, the closeness you experienced earlier feels like part of a larger pattern, not just a moment. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, feeling the steady warmth still held around you. It is easier to understand now how each action contributes to the whole. Gathering wood, storing it properly, sealing drafts, layering fabrics, sharing space, preparing food. None of these stand alone. Another interesting detail suggests that planning for winter often began well in advance, with households preparing not just fuel but also food, clothing, and materials needed to endure the colder months. As you consider this, you realize how much foresight is required. You listen again to the quiet of the room. Even in rest, the sense of preparation lingers. The fire is positioned to last. The coverings are arranged with care. Everything is ready for the next cycle. You begin to see winter not as a single challenge, but as a series of repeating moments, each one managed through the same careful balance of effort and awareness. A continuing point of discussion among researchers is how consistent these routines were across different regions and communities. As you lie here, it seems likely that while details may vary, the underlying principles remain similar. Adapt, prepare, preserve. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your small space. It feels stable, supported by everything that has been done before this moment, everything that will follow after. You imagine the passing of days, the slow accumulation of small actions, each one maintaining the fragile boundary between warmth and cold. There is something deeply calming in this repetition. The idea that even in a harsh season there is structure, predictability, a rhythm that can be relied upon. Another subtle detail suggests that people may have marked time differently in winter, with shorter days and longer nights shaping their perception of routine. As you consider this, the quiet length of the night you are experiencing feels less like an interruption and more like a natural extension of the season. You shift your position slightly, letting the covering settle once more. The warmth remains steady and contained, and as you lie there drifting gently between thought and rest, you begin to understand that surviving winter is not about a single effort, but about maintaining a rhythm, a sequence of actions repeated with care, each one supporting the next. The fire glows softly, the room remains still, and you rest within a pattern that has been shaped over generations, allowing warmth to persist even as the cold continues its quiet presence outside. The steady rhythm of winter life settles into your thoughts, calm and repetitive, yet your awareness begins to widen beyond this single home. You start to imagine how this experience might change depending on where you are. The cold is not the same everywhere, and neither are the ways people respond to it. You lie still, wrapped in your layers, and picture another place. Perhaps further north where winters stretch longer, and the air bites more sharply. Or further south where the chill is present but less severe, more fleeting. The same stone walls, the same hearth, yet different conditions shaping how warmth is managed. A well-supported observation from historical geography indicates that climate varied significantly across medieval Europe, influencing how people built homes and preserved heat. As you consider this, you begin to see how the strategies you've observed might shift depending on location. In colder regions, you imagine thicker walls, smaller openings, fewer places for drafts to enter. The effort to contain heat would be more intense, more deliberate. Firewood would be gathered in greater quantities, stored more carefully, guarded more closely. You picture yourself in Puncture Place. The air outside is sharper, the snow deeper, the nights longer. Inside, the warmth becomes even more precious, every small method of preserving it taking on greater importance. A curious detail sometimes mentioned is that in certain cold air areas, homes were designed with lower ceilings to help retain heat more effectively. As you think about this, it makes sense. Less space means less air to warm, allowing the fire's heat to concentrate more easily. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, imagining how the warmth might feel in such a space, perhaps a little more contained, a little more consistent, though still far from complete comfort. In contrast, you imagine a region where winters are milder. The cold still arrives, but it does not press as relentlessly. The same strategies are used, but perhaps with less urgency. The fire burns, but not always as fiercely. The layers remain, but may not need to be as thick. Some historians continue to explore how regional differences influence not only architecture, but also daily habits and expectations around warmth. As you consider this, you realize how adaptable these practices must have been. You listen again to the quiet of the room and then let your thoughts drift outward once more. In wetter regions, the challenge might not only be cold, but dampness. The air itself carrying moisture that seeps into walls, into fabrics, into wood. Another interesting detail suggests that in such environments, keeping materials dry would be as important as keeping them warm. You can imagine fires burning not just for heat, but to reduce dampness, to dry clothing, to preserve bedding. You shift your hand slightly, feeling the dry warmth of the materials around you. It feels reliable, stable. Yet you can imagine how different it would feel if those same materials held moisture, how the cold would deepen, how warmth would become harder to maintain. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how communities adapted their building techniques and daily routines to local climates, creating variations that reflect both necessity and available resources. As you lie here, you can see how the same basic principles might be applied in different ways. You picture coastal regions where wind carries a different kind of cold, sharper, more penetrating. Homes might be positioned to reduce exposure entrances, arranged to block direct gusts. The same awareness of drafts you noticed earlier would take on even greater importance. You imagine mountainous areas where cold air settles heavily and snow lingers for long stretches. The effort to gather fuel to store it to maintain warmth would become even more demanding. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your own space once more. It feels steady, shaped by the particular conditions of this imagined home. Not the harshest, not the mildest, but balanced in its own way. There is something calming in this realization. The idea that while the cold may vary, the human response remains consistent. Observe, adapt, prepare. Another subtle detail suggests that even within the same region, differences in wealth or access to resources could create variation in how warmth was achieved. As you consider this, you realize how much depends on what is available, not just what is needed. You listen once more to the stillness of the room, letting your thoughts settle. The fire glows softly. The coverings hold their warmth. The cold remains outside, shaped by the broader world you've just imagined. And as you rest there, you begin to understand that the experience of winter is both universal and unique. the same challenges appear in different forms and the same solutions adapt to meet them. The room remains quiet, the warmth steady, and you drift gently within this space, aware now of the many ways people across different places have learned to hold on to heat even as the cold changes around them. The sense of place lingers in your thoughts, different regions shaping different responses to winter, and now your awareness shifts again, this time not across geography but across social space. You begin to imagine how this experience might change depending on where you stand within society itself. You remain still beneath your coverings, yet your mind carries you into another setting. The stone walls grow taller, the ceiling rises higher, the space feels larger, more open, yet somehow colder. A well-supported conclusion from architectural history notes that large medieval buildings such as castles or great halls were often harder to heat effectively than smaller homes. As you picture yourself in such a place, you feel the difference immediately. The hearth is still present, but it is no longer enough to influence the entire space. Its warmth spreads outward, then fades into the vastness of the room. The air above remains cold, untouched by the fire's reach. You imagine sitting near the centre of a great hall. The fire burns brightly, yet the distance between you and the walls feels immense. Shadows stretch long across stone, and the warmth you feel is localized, confined to the immediate area around the hearth. A curious detail sometimes mentioned is that in large halls, people often gathered as close as possible to the fire, leaving much of the room unused during colder months. As you consider this, you realize how similar the behavior is to what you have already experienced, only amplified by a scale. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, imagining how sleeping arrangements might differ here. Beds might be placed in smaller chambers off the main hall spaces that are easier to warm and maintain. Some historians continue to examine how wealth influenced access to more effective heating methods, such as enclosed fireplaces or early chimneys, which improved ventilation and warmth distribution. As you imagine these features, you can see how they might change the experience, making the air less smoky, the warmth more consistent. Yet even with these advantages, the challenge remains. Stone is still stone, cold still settles, warmth still requires effort. You picture heavy curtains hung along walls, not just for decoration but to reduce the impact of cold surfaces. Thick rugs laid across floors, adding a layer of insulation beneath your feet. These details create a sense of refinement, yet their purpose remains practical. Another interesting detail suggests that in wealthier households, beds might be more enclosed, with wooden frames and curtains that trap heat more effectively. You can imagine such a bed now, a small sheltered space, within a larger, colder room. You lie within it in your imagination, noticing how the warmth feels more contained, more deliberate. The materials may be finer, the construction more complex, but the goal is the same: preserve heat, create comfort. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how much these differences in environment truly change the experience of winter. As you reflect on both the smaller home and this larger space, it becomes clear that while the methods may vary, the underlying challenge remains constant. You listen again, imagining the sounds of a great hall at night, the fire crackling more loudly in the open space, the faint echo of movement across stone, the quiet settling of a structure that holds both warmth and cold in uneven balance. You return your thoughts to the smaller enclosed bed where warmth gathers more easily. It feels safer, more manageable even within the larger setting. There is a quiet contrast here. Wealth may offer more resources, more materials, more options, yet it also introduces new challenges. Larger spaces require more effort to heat, more distance for warmth to travel. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your own imagined space. It feels steady, shaped by careful arrangement rather than abundance. Another subtle detail suggests that in some cases, people in larger homes might rely more on portable sources of warmth, such as heated objects or additional coverings to compensate for the difficulty of heating entire rooms. You can see how this mirrors what you have already observed. You listen once more to the quiet of the night. Whether in a small cottage or a large hall, the same sounds emerge. Fire fabric, breath, stillness. And as you rest there, moving between these different spaces in your mind, you begin to understand that while circumstances may change the experience of winter, brings people back to the same essential practices. Gather close, layer carefully, preserve warmth. The room, whether large or small, settles into silence. The fire continues its quiet work, and you remain within your sheltered space feeling the steady warmth that has been shaped by both necessity and adaptation. The contrast between grand halls and smaller homes lingers in your thoughts, yet your awareness drifts once more this time towards something less tangible. Beyond fair fabric and structure, there is another layer shaping how people experience winter: their beliefs. You lie quietly, feeling the steady warmth within your coverings, and begin to sense how the cold itself might be understood not only as a physical force, but as something meaningful, something interpreted through tradition and imagination. A well-documented aspect of medieval life is that natural phenomena, including harsh weather, were often connected to spiritual or symbolic ideas. As you reflect on this, the long winter night feels different. Not just cold, but filled with quiet significance. You imagine the room earlier in the evening when voices still murmured softly near the hearth. Perhaps someone spoke of the season, of what it brings, of what it means. Not in a formal way, but through small remarks, shared understandings passed down over time. A curious detail found in various accounts is that people sometimes associated extreme cold or difficult winters with divine messages or tests interpreting the season as part of a larger order. As you consider this, the effort to stay warm takes on an additional layer. It is not only practical, it is also part of enduring what is believed to be given. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, feeling the warmth hold steady. The cold beyond feels distant for the moment, yet its presence remains. Some historians continue to explore how belief systems influence daily behavior during winter, including how people prepared, endured, and explained hardship. As you lie here, it becomes clear that these beliefs may have offered a kind of quiet reassurance, a way to make sense of the challenges. You listen to the stillness of the room, imagining how such ideas might linger even in silence. A gesture before sleep, a whispered phrase, a moment of reflection near the hearth. Another interesting detail suggests that certain protective customs or small rituals might be observed during colder months, intended to guard the household from misfortune or harsh conditions. You can picture something simple: a careful placing of an object, a quiet habit repeated without question. These actions do not change the temperature, they do not strengthen the fire, yet they shape how people feel within the environment, adding a sense of order to something that might otherwise seem unpredictable. You draw a slow breath, noticing how your own experience of the room shifts slightly. The warmth feels not only physical, but also part of a larger pattern, one that includes thought, belief, and quiet tradition. A continuing point of discussion among researchers is how much these beliefs varied between regions and communities, and how deeply they influence daily life. As you consider this, you realize that even if the details differ, the need to understand and respond to winter is shared. You shift your hand slightly beneath the covering, feeling the steady warmth held by the layers. It remains reliable, grounded in the physical world, yet now accompanied by a sense of something more. You imagine the fire again, its glow steady and calm. It provides warmth, yes, but it also becomes a focal point for thought, for quiet reflection. The flicker of flame invites the mind to wander, to consider things beyond immediate survival. Another subtle detail suggests that long winter nights may have encouraged storytelling and the sharing of ideas, allowing beliefs and traditions to pass from one generation to the next. You can almost hear those stories now carried softly through the room before sleep. You listen again to the present stillness. The voices have faded. The stories, if they were told, have settled into memory. The room rests. And as you lie there, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not only about physical protection, it is also about creating a sense of meaning, a way to face the cold with something more than effort alone. The fire continues its quiet glow. The coverings hold their warmth, and you remain within a space shaped not only by materials and methods, but by the quiet beliefs that help people endure the long winter nights. The quiet weight of belief settles gently into the background, and your awareness drifts once more, widening beyond the walls of this single home. you begin to sense that warmth is not always maintained in isolation. In harsher moments of winter, the boundary between one household and another may become less defined. You lie still, wrapped in steady warmth, and imagine the wider village beyond the door. Small homes clustered together, each holding its own fragile fire, each facing the same long nights and biting cold. A well-supported insight from studies of rural communities suggests that cooperation often played an important role in survival during difficult seasons. As you picture the scene, you can see how that might unfold. Perhaps earlier in the day, someone shared excess firewood with a neighbour whose supply was running low, or a family gathered together in one space rather than maintaining separate fires, conserving fuel while increasing shared warmth. You imagine the quiet movement between homes, a door opening briefly, letting in a gust of cold air, followed by the quick exchange of something practical. A bundle of wood, a container of food, a few words spoken softly before the door closes again. A small but meaningful detail often mentioned is that communities sometimes relied on informal support networks during winter, offering help without ceremony, guided by necessity and familiarity. As you consider this, the idea feels natural, almost inevitable. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, feeling the warmth remain steady. It becomes easier to understand how that warmth might depend not only on what happens within one home, but on the connections between many. Some historians continue to explore how widespread such cooperation was and whether it varied significantly depending on location or social structure. As you imagine the quiet exchanges between neighbours, it feels like a practical response to shared challenges. You listen again to the stillness of the room, then let your thoughts extend outward. Beyond these walls, other fires glow softly. Other families settle into their own rhythms, tending embers, adjusting coverings, holding warmth in place. Another interesting detail suggests that in particularly severe winters, people might gather more closely, sharing space to conserve resources and support one another. You can imagine a larger room, more bodies, more breath, more warmth held together. The air in such a space would feel different. Fuller, warmer, carrying the presence of many lives. The sounds would blend together, creating a deeper, more layered rhythm. You draw a slow breath, returning your awareness to your own space. The warmth you feel now seems part of something larger, connected to other small pockets of warmth across the village. A continuing point of discussion among researchers considers how these forms of cooperation influenced long-term community resilience. As you lie here, it feels clear that shared effort would strengthen the ability to endure. You imagine the quiet understanding that might exist between neighbours. No formal agreement, no written rules, just a recognition that survival is easier when burdens are shared. You shift your position slightly, feeling the coverings hold their warmth. The fire continues its soft glow, steady and reliable. There is something comforting in this broader perspective. The idea that you are not alone in facing the cold, even if you remain within the boundaries of this single room. Another subtle detail suggests that even simple acts such as checking on a neighbour or sharing a small resource could make a meaningful difference during difficult times. You can picture a brief visit, a quiet exchange, then a return to the warmth within. You listen once more to the calm of the night. The room remains still, yet beyond it, life continues in parallel, each household maintaining its own fragile balance. And as you rest there, you begin to understand that warmth is not only something created and protected within walls, it is also something supported by connection, by the quiet ways people help one another through the season. The fire glows softly, the coverings remain secure, and you lie within a space that is both individual and part of something larger, feeling the steady reassurance of shared endurance. The quiet sense of shared endurance lingers softly in your thoughts. Yet as the night stretches on, your awareness begins to return to the room itself, to the subtle ways people pass time, when darkness settles and the fire becomes the only source of light. Even in winter, even in cold, there are moments that feel almost warm in a different sense. You listen carefully, and though most of the room has settled into sleep now, you can imagine the earlier hours more vividly. The time just before rest, when the fire still burned a little brighter, when voices carried gently through the space. A well-supported insight from cultural history suggests that winter evenings often became a time for storytelling, especially when outdoor work was limited and families gathered indoors. As you picture this moment, you can almost hear it. A voice calm and steady sharing something familiar. A story passed down shaped by the memory, told in a way that fits the rhythm of the fire. Others listening quietly, not interrupting, simply letting the words fill the space. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, imagining how that would feel. The warmth of the hearth, the presence of others, the slow unfolding of a story that carries both comfort and distraction. A small but engaging detail sometimes mentioned is that storytelling in these settings often blended fact belief and imagination, creating narratives that were as much about connection as they were about information. As you consider this, the firelight itself seems to invite such stories, its flicker adding movement to every word. You listen again, and though the voices have faded now, you can almost sense their echo. The rhythm of speech, the pauses, the soft reactions from those listening. Some historians continue to explore how oral traditions were preserved through these quiet moments, especially in times when written texts were less accessible. As you imagine the repetition of stories across many nights, it becomes clear how memory would carry them forward. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth within your coverings. It is steady and supported not only by materials and preparation, but by the calm atmosphere created earlier in the evening. Another interesting detail suggests that winter nights being longer may have allowed more time for such storytelling, giving people space to share experiences, ideas, and traditions. You can picture how this would shape the feeling of the season. The cold remains outside, pressing quietly against the walls, yet inside there is a different kind of warmth that lingers, from fire, not from fabric, but from shared attention. You shift your position slightly, feeling the layers adjust around you. The warmth remains contained while your thoughts continue to drift through the memory of those earlier moments. There is something deeply soothing in the idea of stories told by firelight. The combination of warmth, light, and voice creates a sense of continuity, a connection between past and present. A continuing point of discussion among researchers considers how storytelling may have influenced social bonds within households and communities. As you lie here, it feels natural that such moments would strengthen those connections. You listen once more to the stillness of the room. The voices are gone now. The stories have ended. What remains is the quiet that follows, gentle and complete. You imagine the last words spoken before sleep. Perhaps a simple closing, perhaps nothing at all, just a natural fading of sound as people settle into their own spaces. Another subtle detail suggests that these moments of shared storytelling might also have helped ease the transition into sleep, calming the mind and preparing the body for rest. As you consider this, it feels very much like the moment you are in now. You draw another slow breath, letting the calm settle deeper. The warmth holds steady. The room remains still. And as you lie there, drifting gently between memory and rest, you begin to understand that warmth in this world is not only physical, it is also shaped by moments of connection, by the quiet sharing of stories that make the long winter nights feel a little shorter. The fire glows softly. The room rests in silence, and you remain within this calm space, carrying the gentle echo of voices that once filled the air, guiding you further into sleep. The echo of quiet voices fades completely, and the room settles into a deeper stillness. Yet your awareness begins to shift, once more gently moving forward in time. The night feels long, but it is not endless. Somewhere beyond the walls, change has already begun. You lie quietly wrapped in steady warmth and sense something subtle in the air. It is not warmer, not yet, but different. A faint shift that is almost impossible to describe, as if the darkness itself is beginning to loosen its hold. A widely accepted observation from environmental history notes that even before sunrise, small changes in light and temperature can signal the gradual transition toward morning. As you remain still, you begin to imagine how those changes would be felt. The fire has burned low, its glow now little more than a soft pulse in the darkness. The warmth it provides is minimal, yet enough to maintain the fragile balance within the room. You listen carefully. The sounds remain soft, but something has changed. The stillness feels lighter, less heavy than before. It is as if the night has reached its deepest point and is now slowly turning. A small but intriguing detail sometimes mentioned is that people in pre-modern environments often became highly attuned to these subtle shifts, recognizing the approach of dawn before it was visible. As you consider this, you begin to sense how such awareness might feel. You draw a slow breath, noticing how your body remains warm within its layers. The cold outside has not disappeared, but it feels less pressing, as if its intensity has peaked and now holds steady rather than increasing. Some historians continue to explore how daily routines adapted to these early morning transitions, especially in relation to light and temperature. As you imagine the coming hours, you can see how the first movements of the day would begin quietly, almost reluctantly. You picture someone stirring, not fully awake, but aware enough to sense the change. A small movement beneath coverings, a shift in breathing, the earliest sign that rest is nearing its end. Another interesting detail suggests that in some cases people might wake briefly during the night and again before dawn, reflecting a different pattern of sleep than what you are used to. As you lie here, the idea feels natural, shaped by the length and rhythm of the night. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth adjust around you. The layers still hold, though the fire no longer contributes much. Your body has become the primary source of warmth, now supported by everything that has been carefully arranged. You listen again, and this time you notice something beyond the room. A faint sound, distant and uncertain. Perhaps the first sign of life outside, a bird tentative testing the edge of morning. The sound is brief, then gone, but it leaves an impression. The world is changing. A continuing point of discussion among researchers considers how these subtle environmental cues influenced waking patterns and daily rhythms. As you imagine the gradual return of light, it feels less like a sudden shift and more like a slow unfolding. You draw another slow breath, feeling the calm of the moment. The warmth remains steady, though you know it will soon need to be rebuilt. The fire will need tending, the day will begin. Yet for now there is a quiet pause, a space between night and morning where everything feels suspended. Another subtle detail suggests that frost or condensation might form on surfaces during the night, only to begin fading as the first light approaches. You can imagine the edges of the window, the stone walls holding that delicate trace of cold. You remain still, letting the moment stretch. The darkness softens slightly, though not enough to see clearly. The air feels the same, yet somehow lighter, and as you lie there aware of this gentle transition, you begin to understand that winter is not only about enduring the cold. It is also about recognizing these small shifts, these quiet signals that change is always moving even when it feels slow. The room remains calm, the fire barely glowing, and you rest within your carefully held warmth, sensing the approach of morning before it fully arrives. The faint hint of morning lingers just beyond the walls, and you remain still for a while longer, suspended between rest and waking. The warmth you have held through the night remains, though softer, now less certain. Yet something else begins to take its place. You begin to notice not just the cold, but your ability to endure it. You draw a slow breath, feeling the steady rhythm of your body, and realize how much has been required to reach this point. Every small action, every adjustment, every layer, all working together to carry you through the long hours of darkness. A well-supported insight from historical interpretation suggests that survival in harsh winter conditions depended not only on resources but on adaptability and resilience. As you lie here, that idea feels deeply present. You imagine the countless nights that have come before this one, the repetition of effort, the quiet persistence of maintaining warmth in a world that offers little of it freely. You shift slightly beneath your coverings, feeling how naturally your body now responds. The movements are small, efficient, guided by instinct rather than thought. You no longer need to consider how to keep warm, you simply do it. A curious detail sometimes mentioned is that over time people became highly skilled at managing their environment, developing habits that allowed them to conserve heat with minimal effort. As you consider this, you realize how much of what you have experienced has become almost automatic. You listen again to the room. The breathing of others begins to change, slightly lighter now, as if waking is not far away. The stillness is no longer as deep. There is a quiet readiness in the air, Some historians continue to explore how such resilience shaped not only daily life, but broader cultural attitudes toward hardship and endurance. As you lie here, it becomes clear that this is not simply survival. It is a way of living built on patience and quiet strength. You draw your covering slightly closer, though more out of habit than necessity. The warmth remains, but you sense that soon it will need to be rebuilt, reshaped for the coming day. Another interesting detail suggests that the body itself adapts to colder environments over time, becoming more efficient at conserving heat. You can feel that now in the way your warmth is held through the night, supported by everything around you. You shift your hand slightly, feeling the fabric respond, still holding warmth even as the fire has nearly faded. It is a quiet confirmation of how effective these simple methods can be when combined. You listen again, and this time you notice more movement, a faint rustle, someone stirring more fully, the first signs of waking. A continuing point of discussion among researchers considers how much of this resilience was taught versus learned through experience. As you imagine the cycle of seasons repeating year after year, it seems likely that both play a role. You draw a slow breath, feeling the calm of the moment. The cold remains outside, but it no longer feels like an immediate threat. You have passed through the most difficult part of the night. There is a quiet sense of completion in this, not dramatic, not celebrated, but understood. The night has been endured. Another subtle detail suggests that the first moments of waking in winter might be the most challenging, as the body leaves the warmth of sleep and prepares to face the colder air again. You can imagine that transition, the reluctance to leave the comfort you have built. You remain still for a moment longer, holding on to the warmth you have gathered. The room is beginning to shift slowly, gently, as life prepares to resume. And as you lie there, you begin to understand that resilience in this world is not about dramatic acts, but about consistency. About doing what is needed again and again until it becomes part of who you are. The fire glows faintly. The room begins to stir, and you rest within the final quiet moments of night, feeling the steady strength that has carried you through to morning. The final quiet moments of night hold you gently, and you remain still, aware that something is shifting once more. The warmth you have carried through the darkness lingers, though softer now, ready to give way to the first motions of a new day. You draw a slow breath, and the air feels different again. Not warmer exactly, but lighter. The heaviness of night has eased, replaced by a quiet expectancy that settles across the room. A widely supported observation from daily life studies notes that winter mornings began gradually shaped by the slow return of light and the careful rebuilding of warmth. As you imagine the scene around you, you can sense that transition beginning. Someone stirs nearby more fully this time, a shift beneath coverings followed by a pause, as if the body resists leaving its carefully gathered warmth. You understand that hesitation. The cold waits just beyond the layers. You remain still for a moment longer, holding on to the last of the night's comfort. The fire, now reduced to embers, offers only the faintest glow. It will need to be coaxed back into life soon. A small but meaningful detail often mentioned is that mornings frequently began with the tending of the hearth, reviving the fire from the embers preserved overnight. As you picture this, you can see the quiet movements already forming. Another person stirs, sitting up, slowly wrapped in layers, moving carefully so as not to lose too much warmth at once. The coverings shift, releasing a brief hint of cooler air before settling again. You begin to feel that same readiness within yourself. Not urgency, but a gentle awareness that rest is ending. Some historians continue to explore how these early morning routines shaped the pace of the day, especially during winter months when light was limited. As you imagine the coming hours, it feels clear that everything will begin slowly, deliberately. You shift slightly, letting your body adjust. The warmth you have built remains, but it is no longer enough on its own. Soon the fire must take over again. Another interesting detail suggests that mornings in winter often involved a sequence of small repeated actions, each one contributing to the restoration of warmth. You can imagine them now, gathering fuel, stirring embers, adding kindling, waiting for the first flame to catch. You listen as someone moves toward the hearth. The sound is soft, careful. A tool touches ash. Embers are uncovered, coaxed gently. There is a pause, then a faint crackle as new wood begins to catch. The fire responds slowly at first, then with growing strength. Light returns to the room in soft waves, pushing back the last traces of darkness. You draw a slow breath, feeling the warmth begin to shift once more, moving outward from the hearth, rebuilding what was lost through the night. A continuing discussion among researchers considers how these repeated cycles of warmth and cold shape the daily experience of winter. As you sit with this moment, it feels less like a challenge and more like a rhythm. You begin to understand that everything you have experienced, from gathering wood to layering fabric, from sharing space to tending embers, leads naturally into this renewal. The room grows slightly brighter. Shapes become clearer. The presence of others more defined. Movement returns, though still gentle and unhurried. You sit up slowly in your imagination, feeling the layers shift around you. The warmth you have held remains for a moment longer, then begins to blend with the warmth of the newly revived fire. Another subtle detail suggests that even the first light of day, faint as it may be in winter, contributes to the sense of warmth, offering a psychological lift that complements the physical heat. As you sense that light growing, you understand how important it is. And now, as the fire strengthens and the room begins to wake, you feel the transition complete. Night has given way to morning. Warmth, once fragile and carefully guarded, is being rebuilt once again. You take one last slow breath, letting the calm of the moment settle deeply within you. The fire crackles softly, the room fills with a gentle glow, and everything feels just a little easier than it did in the depths of the night. You allow your thoughts to slow, your awareness to soften. The cold is still out there waiting beyond the walls, but here inside, warmth has returned. And now, as the light grows and the fire steadies, you let yourself drift gently into rest once more, carried by the quiet rhythm of warmth and cold, of night and morning, of effort and calm. The room fades into a softer stillness, the sounds blending into a distant hush. Your breathing slows, your body relaxes. The warmth holds you gently, not tightly, just enough. And as everything settles into quiet, you feel the last edges of thought dissolve, replaced by a calm, steady stillness that carries you deeper into rest. Sweet dream.